Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Mormonism Live. Radio Free Mormon and Bill Reel here to do an episode. We're going to talk about the Book of Abraham tonight, and we've done the Book of Abraham a couple of times in recent weeks, but we're going to keep plugging away at it. And there's two primary reasons why. One is that the Book of Abraham, the translation of it, the evidence that the apologists propose for it, is one of the most complex issues in Mormonism. At least the apologists make it that way, and it shouldn't have to be that way. But the other thing, too, is that it's one of the primary issues that people lose faith over. And so we're going to jump right into it tonight. We've got a really great episode for you. RFM and I have worked really hard on this slideshow, and we hope that each of you will enjoy the show and that you can make more sense out of the Book of Abraham, its translation, the evidence for and against, and that tonight will be helpful in you better understanding that problem within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. RFM, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, and I wanted to say that you had 40 fantastic slides already set up for the show, and then yesterday I looked at them and I went crazy, and I added 40 more slides over the course of the day. And so when and if this show goes long, I'm the responsible party, and I apologize in advance.
Well, I think it's going to be a ton of fun, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I looked over your slides earlier today, and I think these are really important pieces to understanding the problem. So we'll see how this goes. That's the thumbnail, by the way. Mormon mental gymnastics. The guy's contorted so bad that his entire foot is sort of shifted over from where it should be. I also thought of the title, which I think is on the episode, Masterclass in Apologetics. And I'll just show that one here.
Looks like a compound fracture.
Yeah, it does. It looks like his foot is sort of not where it should be, but that's what apologetic mental gymnastics does. And then if you've ever been on Masterclass, the website where experts will teach you how to act or how to play poker or how to mountain climb, whatever it is, they'll just teach various subjects. I thought of that too. This will be a masterclass in apologetics. And what we're going to go into tonight, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but there is a brand new, I want to call it a gospel topic essay, but it may be considered something else by them, but it is under the gospel topic essay section. This is the first one. This is the original. This is Translation and Historicity of the Book of Abraham. This one came out in like 2013, 2014. And then the new one is this one. It's under Church and Gospel Questions, Origins of the Book of Abraham. And we have not gone into this yet. I mentioned it maybe a few months ago when it came out. And then I mentioned it again a week or two ago, and you had mentioned that you had not yet read this or looked over it. And so I thought it'd be a lot of fun for you to go over it and for us to go over it with the audience. And so I'll just jump right into it. But it is this essay that we're going to spend time on tonight. And my big pressing question for the audience is, why does the church feel it necessary to give a second gospel topic essay that goes into the same problems, talks about them a little differently, but goes into the same problems, gives the same apologetics, still falls back on a catalyst or missing scroll theory? And hopefully tonight we can at least come up with some good ideas for why they did that. And so I'll jump right into it. We're not going to read. Yes, please.
I was just going to say that the main difference that leaps out to me between the two documents is that the first one is in essay form, and the second one is in question and answer form. So I think the second one is made to be more accessible. If you have this question about the Book of Abraham, then you can go here and read this piece of the article and so on. So very much in question and answer form. And I wanted to draw your attention, Bill, because when you show that essay up there on the screen, it doesn't have this square underneath the title. When I printed it off, it has this warning in the square, and I wanted to read it to the audience. It says, seeking answers to our questions can draw us closer to Jesus Christ if we apply sound principles. Studying reliable sources is important when seeking answers to gospel-related questions. See the topic, consult reliable sources, to explore more tips on answering questions. So I want to make sure we all had that warning in mind before we proceeded.
and proceed we will. So we won't be reading the entire paper here that's written on the church's site, but we'll go into the sections that I think are drawing conclusions that deserve discussion, whether they are things that deserve some pushback. I think there's a place or two where we can acknowledge that the church has a mild piece of evidence, but then when they get to their conclusions, I think they jump the shark, and all of us sort of know it once you're on this side of things. But it begins with this book of scripture was revealed to Joseph Smith beginning in 1835 at a time when he was studying some ancient Egyptian papyri the saints had purchased. And I just want to note here, RFM, that they are setting this up as if like there just happens to be some papyri in the room. Joseph bought it. And, he's looking at the papyri, and then there's this book of scripture that's revealed to him. And it sort of ignores this entire heading that used to be with the book of Abraham, that it was the writings of Abraham, that this papyri that Joseph Smith was studying, some ancient papyri that he was looking at, happens to be the actual writings of Abraham written by his own hand upon papyrus. This isn't just some ancient Egyptian papyri. This was proposed to be by Joseph Smith himself, the writings of Abraham written by his own hand. I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I at least want to note that it isn't just some papyri.
Well, the next sentence is interesting because although it does mention the T word, the translation word, it does it in such a way as to minimize it. Many people saw the papyri, but no eyewitness account of the translation process exists. So we've got a completely blank canvas on which we can paint any dang catalyst theory we want.
Except that we hit the very first falsehood, which is that we do actually have somebody who spoke on the translation of this, and that was Warren Parrish in the Painesville Republican, Thursday, February 15th, 1838, when he said, "I have sat by his side and penned down the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, as he claimed to receive it by direct inspiration of heaven." And so Warren Parrish is certainly telling us that, I was in the room and he was looking at the papyri and he was telling us what the hieroglyphics mean, and we were writing it down. And that seems to at least be one eyewitness account of the translation process.
I was going to try and defend this in some way by saying that the church, well, this isn't detailing the process by which it was done. But then I went and looked back at the claim in their essay, and they're not requiring it. This is actually wrong. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of wiggle room for the church on this when they say many people saw the papyri, but no eyewitness account of the translation process exists. Boom, Warren Parrish. That's not true.
Is he describing the translation process, even if slightly ambiguous?
Well, yeah, yes. Yeah. And by the way, stop with, is he describing the translation process ? I must say yes. And then you say, is he an eyewitness? And I must say yes.
And I'll just say this too. Does it matter in Mormonism if an eyewitness describes the translation process verbatim? We have eyewitnesses who describe the Book of Mormon translation process. And they say, a word would appear and we'd have to make sure it was spelled right, or he would say it over again. And the church and its apologists just discard those statements anytime they need to. So it wouldn't have mattered if there was an eyewitness statement who described it uber specifically. We'd still have the catalyst theory and the missing scroll theory regardless.
Yeah, I think this is a statement being made. First off, it's in contradiction to the facts. See Warren Parrish. But I think this is a statement that is being made in order to make room for catalysts and revelations and non-translations.
Yes. So with that, masterclass in Mormon apologetics. So the next section I wanted to talk about here, it says this book of scripture was revealed to Joseph Smith beginning in 1835. Says this is the same thing, but now it's that third sentence that's underlined. Only small fragments of the long papyrus scrolls once in Joseph's possession exist today. Now, we spent tons of time on this a couple of weeks ago.
And it's a good thing we did.
Yeah. It bears notice again. Oliver Cowdery, a contemporary 1835, December of 1835. This is when it is all happening in Kirtland, when the mummies are bought. And so you have Oliver Cowdery saying, when examined, proved to be 2 rolls of papyrus previously mentioned, I may add that 2 or 3 other small pieces of papyrus with astronomical calculations, epitaphs, and etc., were found with others of the mummies. Again, we know what these rolls are. We have the Book of Joseph, which is the Book of the Dead to Tasheritmin. We have the Book of Abraham papyrus. That is the breathing permit of Hor. We are missing a section of that Book of Abraham papyrus, but we know for the most part what essentially would have filled the entire void of that papyrus.
Yes.
It's facsimile number 3. We also have another Book of the Dead, which again, I have to presume is what Joseph Smith said was the story of this Princess Katamin. We've got the Hypocephalus, and then we've got one vignette from the Book of the Dead for Nefer-Nebu, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but we have the vignette from it. We don't have the rest of the papyrus. So what we're actually missing is facsimile 3, the Princess Katamin story, which is the Book of the Dead of Amenhotep, and we're missing the rest of the roll for the Book of the Dead of Nefer-Nebu. We've got enough. We don't have the original, but we have enough of the Hypocephalus to know what we had. We've got enough of the Book of Joseph, essentially all of it, and we've got the Book of Abraham papyrus, and the one piece we're missing we know about. The church is, again, I think, playing on words here to try to make the audience think about this a certain way. And I think people will see that happen throughout this entire article, that only small fragments of the long papyrus scrolls once in Joseph's possession exist today. And as you pointed out, anything less than the full thing is considered a fragment, and they are using that word to the nth degree with their readership.
Right. And just looking at it, and that's why it's so good that you went over this in such detail. And we've got this diagram. So roughly there's around 50% that's still there from what was had originally. And by originally, I mean when the scroll came off the printing press back in Egypt. I'm not talking about when Joseph Smith had it, because maybe some pieces were missing even from when he had it and when it came into his possession. So we don't know that all of these happened after they were in his possession. But maybe 50, maybe a little bit less than 50% is there. The problem is that is not accurately represented by the statement in the church essay saying only small fragments of the long papyrus scrolls once in Joseph's possession exist today. That is misleading and deceptive because it is not accurate, and it is said for one reason and one reason only: to make room for the missing scroll theory, or the missing scroll or papyrus piece, the long scroll theory, right? That's why they put that in there. And if you have not noticed, all we've been talking about since the beginning of the show is this one paragraph. The first paragraph, the first sentence had a palpable deception. The second sentence had a palpable deception. Now we're on the third sentence, but it's all in the same paragraph.
Yeah, we're one paragraph in, and there's already 3 deceptive statements made. Okay, then we have the last sentence of this paragraph. The relationship between the Egyptian writings on those papyri and the scriptural text we have today is not known.
By the way, what's the natural conclusion from that, Bill? There's no relationship.
Yes, there is no relationship.
If you don't know it, if you can't tell, there's probably no relationship. So why are you looking for one unless it's a religious quest?
But doesn't Joseph Smith tell us that there's a relationship? If I asked you, RFM, does Joseph Smith tell us that there's a relationship between the Egyptian writings on those papyri and the scriptural text we have today? When I say these are the writings of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there have to be, because we have facsimile 1. It's not just the characters, it's also the facsimiles that he's interpreting.
There are 4 sentences in paragraph 1, and there are 4 deceptions to go along with them. They couldn't even get through the opening paragraph without misleading the audience to think a lot of assumptions about the Book of Abraham and its translation that aren't not only not proven to be true. The more likely conclusion is evidenced in other ways. It's evidenced in other conclusion.
Yes. Now, hypertechnically, it is the second paragraph, at least on my copy.
Yes, it is.
But I wanted everybody to not get lost and look at the first paragraph. Go ahead and read it all. Read the first paragraph. Read the second paragraph.
Read them all. But in the second paragraph, every sentence is dishonest.
Well,
Okay.
the last one is strictly true. The relationship between the Egyptian writings on those papyri and the Book of Abraham we have today is not known.
Yes, but did Joseph Smith claim it was known?
Yes, well, he was translating the freaking characters just like everybody knew he was and like he told everybody he was.
Who are we to tell him he's wrong?
We are today's modern Mormon apologists. That's who we are.
So then the next paragraph I want to touch on is the truth and value of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate. Well, actually it can, but we don't like the conclusion that it comes to. As Robert Rittner says, that other than those who, and again, I'm going to just paraphrase him, but other than those who are wanting to be misled, the case is closed. So there's that. The truth and value of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate. Its status as scripture lies in the eternal truths it teaches and the powerful spirit it conveys. Each of us can study its teachings and pray for confirmation from the Holy Ghost that its message is from God. All the evidence from outside Egyptologists who have spoken on this issue, have looked at this issue, say it is a closed case. And because of that, the church needs this to have an out. They need to have an out on this issue. So they say that this cannot be settled by scholarly debate, that it must be done by the Holy Ghost. Now, Mormonism is one of the few religions who says, like, go get your answer from the Spirit and use that as a barometer of truth. Use that as a litmus test of truth, and do not trust the scholarly debates out there. It's a tricky thing when, again, you set up the believer to use your collective witness model, for instance. You set up the reader to use your litmus test for how to decide truth, and you ignore, for the most part, all of the evidence that is out there that runs contrary to your point of view. In other words, if you were a non-Mormon who was objective, who was using critical thinking skills, you would look at the Book of Abraham and you would go, okay, I'm going to consult some Egyptologists. I'm not going to look at just the Mormon guys. I'm going to consult Egyptologists all over the place. And you would find that they are unanimous all across the world, with the exception of 2 or 3 guys in the church, maybe 4 if we count Michael Rhodes. And it would be shown, again, what Joseph Smith said about it, what he said about those facsimiles, where he's getting symbols from for the Kirtland Egyptian papers, what Robert Rittner and all other Egyptologists outside of the church have said when they've spoken on the Book of Abraham directly, all points to this not being what Joseph Smith claimed it was. But we can't go down that path. So we just can't trust. It can't be settled by scholarly debate. It has to be done by the Holy Ghost. It's a message that must come from God. And I only note here, excuse me, I only note here that you can say this kind of thing about other pieces of literature or claims that have been made. There were the young girls who made the claims about fairies, that the Photoshop photos happened, right?
The Cottingley fairies.
Yes. You've got the Michigan relics. You've got the Urantia text. You've got the Bhagavad Gita, which is scripture, which if I say you can't trust scholarly debate that the Bhagavad Gita isn't a true history, you have to pray about it. You can't trust the fair. What was the fairy story? The Cottingley?
Mm-hmm. The girls who would go into the woods and with a camera and come out with pictures of them cavorting with little fairies.
Yep. You can't trust the expert photography forensic people. You must go to the Lord and get an answer from the Holy Ghost. You can't know that the Urantia text is absurd. You must go to the Holy Ghost. You can't know that the Michigan relics are frauds. You must get your answer from the Spirit. That's a line of thinking that is used when something isn't true, and such untruthfulness can be shown by going into what the experts have to say about it.
If I could just point out a couple things. First off, we're encountering here what's going to be an inherent, at least one inconsistency in this article. And the inconsistency is that they're saying that the truth of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate. And then they're going to engage in scholarly debate. Okay. That's what I'm talking about, the inconsistency of this entire article. They want to have all of their bases covered, even when some of those are inconsistent positions with each other. The second thing is that on behalf of Robert Rittner, I want to say he would agree with this paragraph. There's nothing in this paragraph that he would disagree with. That the truth and value of the Book of Mormon cannot be settled by scholarly debate, that its status as scripture lies in the eternal truths it teaches and the powerful spirit it conveys. You can study it, everything. He didn't have a problem with any of that. He doesn't have a problem with people believing that the Book of Abraham is scripture. The problem he had was certain people, and one former student of his in particular, I believe, bastardizing the discipline of Egyptology that Robert Rittner had taught him, and I'm talking about John Gee, to the point where Robert Rittner felt a personal and vested interest in clarifying the matter and setting the record straight.
Yes. The trouble, though, is that Mormonism conflates truth, any degree of truth in Scripture, and the powerful spirit it conveys with truth being defined as historicity. In other words, if Mormonism stepped forward and said, look, this isn't really the writings of Abraham. They were never written by his own hand. This papyrus isn't connected to the Book of Abraham in any way. Joseph, on some level, is making this up, but he's still placed within it divine truths, and the Spirit can convey that there is still truth here to be learned by us Latter-day Saints. I would get on board with that. You would agree with that. When Mormonism says things like its status as scripture lies in the eternal truths it teaches and the powerful spirit it conveys, that comes along with what's unsaid, which is that its historicity in some way, shape, or form is true.
Yeah, this is Mott and Bailey, classic Mott and Bailey. Now they're defending the general proposition. They've backed away instead of proclaiming the specific proposition, which is that the Book of Abraham is authentic. By the way, Bill and everybody, if you think that you were dumb to be taken in by any religion, up to and including Mormonism, and if you think you must have been the stupidest person to ever do that, or on the other hand, if you have read the Book of Mormon and you have a testimony and you're active in the church and you think there's no way you could be deceived by what you experienced as you prayed your way through the Book of Mormon, I want to bring up this one point, and that is this picture of this fairy made out of cardboard, painted cardboard and pinned together and posed for a picture shot there, right? A shot there. Cameras, of course, is like around the 19-teens, I think it would have been. Let me see here. Maybe it's the 1920s. It was in England, of course. Well, it was back then anyway. The main part isn't when it happened. The main part is that one of the most ardent believers in the reality of the Cottingley fairies was Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. One of the most brilliant men that I know of in history. So all I'm saying is, if you think that you're too smart to be taken in, always remember this episode with Arthur Conan Doyle and the Cottingley fairies. And on the other hand, if you think you must have been so stupid to be taken in, remember the same episode. Maybe you won't feel so bad.
Yeah, and just time-wise, it was 1917 when the first two photographs were taken.
Thank you.
And it says here that the pictures came to the attention of writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who used them to illustrate an article on fairies he had been commissioned to write for the Christmas 1920 edition of the Strand magazine. Doyle was enthusiastic about the photographs and interpreted them as clear and visible evidence of supernatural phenomena. So Sherlock Holmes, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, who always sees through what the criminal maybe wants you to see, what the crime scene is difficult to pick up there. He's the one who sees through it all, and he was fooled by this. So good point, RFM. Okay.
Thank you. It was a long detour in a long show, and I apologize.
All right. So next up, most of the papyri that were in Joseph's possession are now lost, though some fragments have survived. Now, again, when they say that, they're intimating that they're lost. We don't know what they were. We don't have them. We can't look at them. We can't, But again, we have essentially all of the 2 long rolls. We're missing something that would have been slightly longer than the 2 small pieces, but less than the 2 long rolls. And we're missing that, but we have some of the symbols off of it. So Egyptologists can, in fact, look at those symbols that we do have, and they know what it belongs to, that it is a Book of the Dead, that they know, and they also see the name of the person who died, Amenhotep. So we know what it was. And then we've got a reproduction contemporary made by Joseph Smith and those working with him of the Hypocephalus. And we have the vignette from the Book of the Dead of Nefer-ur-Nebu. So we actually do either have the original or have a very good representation of probably about 80% of what we should have. The only thing we're really missing is that Book of the Dead of Amenhotep.
Right. And facsimile 3 and whatever language might be in that missing portion and the rest of this other Book of the Dead. So and then you've got the copied characters from a scroll that doesn't exist anymore on the second. And I think it's probably a little bit less than 50% as I look at it. But
you're missing
regardless, and I think that's what allows them to say most of the papyri. It's probably just a little over 50%.
Yeah, but I don't count the hypocephalus. I mean, the hypocephalus is missing. They're right when taken literally. But what they're trying to do is convey that, the hypocephalus is missing. We don't know what's on it. It's gone. How could we ever know? We have the reproduction of the hypocephalus. We have the reproduction of facsimile 3. So we essentially have the 2 long rolls. You're right. There might be, as Robert Rittner said, 2 or 3 columns of writing that we're missing in the Book of Abraham papyrus. We have the Book of Joseph, as far as I know, for the most part in full. We have the hypocephalus, a reproduction of it in full. We have a small piece of the Book of the Dead of Nefer-ur-Nebu, and we're missing essentially all of the Book of the Dead of Amenhotep. So there's that. It says, how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Abraham? It's that section. And so again, most of the papyri that were in Joseph's possession are now lost. Even if the extreme of 50% is used, that's certainly not most of the papyri.
Right. Once again, they're trying to minimize the amount that was preserved.
Yeah. And all the gospel topic essays are done this way. They're all carefully worded, and they all nudge the narrative as far as they possibly can, using words meant to create a certain belief and feeling within the believers that they will, in their heads, form the narrative a certain way. And when you look at what's really going on, you start to see that it happens over and over and over again, which is why I thought this article was worth the attention. All right, next, some Latter-day Saints believe that the text of the Book of Abraham was found on the papyri that are now missing. And I put here, remember, this theory actually requires, this is the missing scroll theory. And it started off as a really long missing scroll theory because of Hugh Nibley's fourth hand account. And then John Gee, an Egyptologist, does the math and comes up with there has to be about 40 feet or so of this roll, and we only have about 6 or 7 feet of it. And
it was all the Book of Abraham.
Yep. So it's all missing. And then even John Gee acknowledged his math was not very good, and he came down to about 10 to 12 feet.
We can still squeeze it in there.
Yep. And then Chris, I want to say Chris Smith, and again, I forget the physicist's name, but Andrew something, I believe. But Chris Smith and Andrew did a scientific study where Andrew was a physicist, and they came up with essentially facsimile 3 would be practically all that's missing. And again, Robert Rittner has chimed in and said there could be maybe 2 to 3 more columns of characters, not necessarily because some roles don't have it, but some do. And so there could be 2 to 3 more columns of characters, but that's all that he would expect beyond facsimile 3. And then we noted in the episode that we did that the really big glaring problem, and Dan Vogel noted this by saying that if the missing scroll theory is true, you also have to have a missing scroll for the book of Joseph, because we know that what we have claiming that is the book of Joseph is not the book of Joseph.
Nothing about Joseph in that scroll. It's a book of the dead.
And then I added that you actually have to have a third missing scroll, because you have to have this narrative that Joseph claimed was the narrative of Princess Cottoman. You have to have her document as well. So you actually have to have 3 missing scrolls. And it just so happens the 3 things we're missing are the 3 things that would have proved the church to be true. But all 3 of those are just gone. And we have other things, but that damn Chicago fire. So there's that.
Yes. It was a hot time in Chicago. So listen, that first sentence, some Latter-day Saints, I just want to reframe that statement, okay? It says some Latter-day Saints believe that the text of the book of Abraham was found on the papyri that are now missing. I would reframe it as follows. No non-Latter-day Saint believes that the text of the book of Abraham was found on the papyri that are now missing.
Okay, say that again.
Well, there's no non-Latter-day Saint who believes that tripe, but there's a couple of crazy-ass Latter-day Saints who do.
No non-Latter-day Saint Egyptologist.
No, period.
I understand.
In the entire world.
Yes, all people. There's no non-Latter-day Saint who believes that the book of Abraham was on papyrus that is missing.
Right.
Yes. And to drive it home, some of those people that we just said are Egyptologists with expertise in these fields. And they have spoken at length not only about every piece of evidence indicates that Joseph Smith is pulling off some sort of deception when he claims that he's translating the book of Abraham, but also that the credibility in their eyes of the very Egyptologists the church has that they have worked with. Kara Cooney has worked with Kerry Molstein and thinks he's a hack. Robert Rittner had John Gee as a student and thinks he's a hack. And so the few LDS Egyptologists who want to make extraordinary claims as if they're evidence have been denounced by the renowned Egyptologists that are out there in the world outside of Mormonism.
And this is once again an example of people even in higher fields. When I say higher, I mean higher learning. Egyptology is a great deal of study that goes into getting a degree. And these two, Kerry Mulestein and John Gee, I'm looking at both of you. You have sacrificed your reputation in the community of your Egyptologist peers for a mess of pottage. You have done it just to try and prove the book of Abraham true, even when it flies in the face of the accepted standards of Egyptology, which is why you're held in disrepute. This is another example of how Mormonism gets people to violate their own ethics.
And Dan Vogel makes a great point here. By the way, I was going to play a second of this.
And so I start out with an assumption that the book of Abraham and the book of Mormon and anything else, excuse me, that we get from the restored gospel is true. Therefore, any evidence I find, I will try and fit into that paradigm.
I've heard that so many times. I love the cough, the Kermit cough, when the lie sticks in his throat.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening. He knows what he's saying is nonsense. By the way, Dan Vogel makes a great point. Why don't any of the characters of the actual book of Abraham or book of Joseph or the narrative of Princess Cottoman make their way into the Kirtland Egyptian papers. It's a twofold problem. It's not only does the Kirtland Egyptian papers contain material that actually Joseph wasn't translating, it lacks having any of the material that Joseph was translating. It's a twofold. In other words, RFM, the look on your face is you're not getting it. So let me say it again.
Because it does have some verses, some text from the Book of Abraham.
No, that's not what I mean.
Okay.
The Book of Abraham papyrus is clearly not the Book of Abraham. According to the church, it doesn't match. It must be either a catalyst theory or a missing scroll. If it's the missing scroll, how come none of the missing scroll material from the Book of Abraham, from the Book of Joseph, from the narrative of Princess Cottoman make their way into the Kirtland Egyptian papers?
I see.
Why did the scribes only write down the wrong stuff and not any tiniest bit of the right stuff?
It's for the same reason that they cut out the pictures and the non-important parts of the scrolls to hang on their walls, and they got rid of all the important stuff.
Yes. How does that happen?
Exactly.
And then
By the way, so everybody understands, we are ripping, we're saying the exact opposite. It's National Opposite Day. Obviously, they would keep the important stuff. They would hang it, they would put it in under glass and protect it and frame it to protect it. So that is the important stuff. That is the Book of Abraham. Duh. And the same thing for what you were saying, Bill.
yes, even if there was a missing scroll, even if the Kirtland Egyptian papers had the wrong documents on it, you would think that there should have at least been something from the right scrolls on the Kirtland Egyptian papers too.
I was looking forward to the book of the Princess Cottoman.
Yeah, and it hasn't shown up yet. So anyway, there are 3 missing scrolls out there. If Mormon long scroll for the Book of Abraham is the real thing that happened. So now there's that first sentence. Now here's the second one. Others conclude that Joseph's study of the papyri prompted a revelation about key events and teachings in the life of Abraham, much as he had earlier received revelation about the life of Moses while studying the Bible. According to this view, the papyri acted as a catalyst for a revelation about Abraham.
I saw that word. I saw what they did there.
Say more.
Catalyst.
Yeah, there's their catalyst theory.
According to this view, by the way, which we have no idea which is correct and which is not. We're just sitting here telling you different things that people have concluded without revelation, so you can decide among them which one works for you, because the church takes no position.
Well, they have one position, which is that it's not what the critics say, which is that Joseph Smith carried out a deception and fooled everybody by making up the Book of Abraham and claiming it was somewhere on these papyri.
Okay.
That theory is not allowed on the table, even though it's the most rational theory. It has the most evidence. It has the least amount of contradictions.
No, but you got to understand, I know you do, that the catalyst theory says it may look like Joseph Smith was doing exactly all of those things you just said that the critics say happened, that he pretended that there was characters on these papyri that included Abraham's autograph, and he pointed it out to at least one person at one point. That is Abraham's autograph, and that he did translate from these very, very characters into what we have as the Book of Abraham. Everybody knew that. Everybody understood that. And Joseph Smith said, God is directing me, right? All of that is true from the critical point of view. The crazy thing is that all of that is also true from the catalyst point of view, which is completely indistinguishable from the Joseph is a fraud point of view. Because what it posits is that Joseph Smith did think that all of this stuff was true because God did tell him that all of this stuff was true. Only God was just kidding around. God wasn't really going to have him translate the characters. I mean, good grief, nobody knows Egyptian well enough to translate. So instead, God is going to let Joseph Smith think he's translating from the Egyptian when God is actually beaming in an independent revelation about Abraham in Joseph Smith's head. That's the catalyst theory.
Yes, except that if I put the catalyst theory on one side of the chalkboard and I put the critic's point of view on the other, the critic's point of view has less contradictions than the catalyst theory. So I pointed out here at the bottom, remember, this view runs counter to what Smith said about the papyri. It runs counter to what shows up on the Kirtland Egyptian papers. And it runs counter to Don Bradley and Mark Ashurst McGee's work on the Kinderhook plates. Hey, Don, I'm still waiting for you to solve that problem. You promised me you would. It runs contradictory to Don Bradley and Mark Ashurst McGee's work on the Kinderhook plates, and it essentially agrees with the critic on most points and requires more conjecture than what the critic requires for their point of view.
Well, look, I'm not saying it's impossible, but the catalyst theory does posit not only the existence of a God who speaks to Joseph Smith, and a God who lies to Joseph Smith. The catalyst theory does posit a lying God, and that's probably one of its strongest points.
Yeah. Dan here says they spent a lot of time copying characters from the Book of the Dead. If they had only copied the Egyptian Book of Abraham, the apologists would have proof without the scroll. But darn those Joseph Smith scribes and Smith himself, whose handwriting is in the Kirtland Egyptian papers. Dang them for just copying the wrong characters down and proceeding to translate those facsimiles when those aren't related to it either.
Look closely.
So there's that. Okay. Next, there's another little image. Some hand coming out of the ground with Elmer's glue trying to put that cracked foundation back together.
It's thing.
Up top, you've got the leader, the unchanging truth, divine witness. Underneath, you've got damage control happening. That's what the apologists do. This one's interesting. From July 1835 to November 1835, Joseph Smith and his scribes created several documents related to the characters on Egyptian papyri. These include what are known as the Egyptian alphabet documents and the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language. Joseph Smith and his scribes copied characters from the papyri and other sources into these documents and suggested multiple explanations called degrees for each character. By the way, this is playing on Ed Goebel's theory. So they even have a little bit of Ed Goebel's theory in here as well, where things can be understood to mean what the Egyptologists understand it to mean, but it could also mean other degrees of things that maybe the Egyptologist doesn't quite understand yet.
Does it strike you that as they're describing these degrees, they're not really letting the reader know that they were entire paragraphs in some instances?
No, they don't want you to know that.
That might seem kind of kooky.
Yeah. So for each character, these explanations do not generally match scholarly interpretations.
Generally, huh?
Oh boy. Okay. There are two moments where they would claim an exception where something does match, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
And that's actually only in the facsimiles, though, right?
Yes, not anywhere else.
Yeah, because these are the characters as opposed to the facsimiles, right? That it's talking about.
Yep.
So I wonder what explanation they're trying to talk about with those explanations. That they don't generally match scholar. That's true even if none of them match.
Yes, if none of them match, those explanations don't generally match scholarly interpretation. See, this is how, when you're a Mormon apologist and the church trying to find a loophole to create a space for faith and belief where there is none, this is the way you have to twist and contort words and sentences in order to get what you need.
This is why the church always has a lawyer as the historian.
Joseph Smith and also for attorney-client privilege, but Joseph Smith and his contemporaries did not explain how these documents relate to the Book of Abraham. Actually, if you take out the need to believe, it's actually crystal clear, isn't it?
They told you over and over again, you just will not listen to your founding prophet.
If these had matched, they would clearly point out the Kirtland Egyptian papers as a type of dictionary for the Book of Abraham. If these had matched.
I think the documents that have certain characters on the side and then have certain passages from the Book of Abraham in them, I don't think that they need to explain how those documents relate to the Book of Abraham because it's plain on its face.
The Kirtland Egyptian papers is the explanation, right? Like, they don't need to explain because this is it. They're telling everyone who reads the Kirtland Egyptian papers, that these Egyptian symbols equal these English words and paragraphs. These Egyptian symbols equal this number system. And unless you start off with the need to believe otherwise, it is crystal clear to the observer what is going on in the KEP.
Yeah.
All right. It says here, some scholars believe they were an attempt to learn Egyptian.
There are no scholars who believe that. There's only fake scholars. Fake scholars with fraudulent degrees. There, I said it.
They should use the word researchers. Let's change it for them. Some researchers believe
Writer/researcher.
And again, too, some researchers believe they were an attempt to learn Egyptian using not using the already revealed portions of the book of. That doesn't make any sense. So you have to believe that they have the sections of the book of Abraham, and rather than match them to the Egyptian characters that are on the missing scroll that belong to that section of the book of Abraham, they instead, or if it's a catalyst theory, that they are completely just winging it because they have no clue what anything would mean if it's a catalyst theory. Hence, they have to be just picking and choosing whatever symbol they want and then choosing where to start and stop every English paragraph as a sort of dart against the wall with no real insight, just a pure 100% guess, not even an educated guess, just a guess, and then think they got it right.
Yes, and as Dan mentioned, he's mentioned so many wonderful things, I know, which is there are portions of the translation project over there that do have passages that we recognize as being from the book of Abraham. There are other places that have passages that have nothing to do with the book of Abraham, and it may have to do with the myth of Prince Ketumen and a bunch of other things. So the question then is, if the scribes did this, which they never did in a million years, by the way, nobody with the triple digit IQ believes this. In fact, only idiots who walk around with drool cups believe this. But among those people who do believe it, right? The question then becomes, if this is really what they're doing, where are they getting the sections of text that don't have anything to do with the book of Abraham to put in the same project opposite another character? See, that's it's already a toast theory. It can't work. It doesn't work. But then it even has more problems with it.
It has so many problems that Brian Haglid, and I always forget the other gentleman's name, even though I've met him over at Family Pawn and had an interesting conversation with him. What's his name?
Richard Nygren?
No, not Richard Nygren. Gentleman at the church historian's office who worked with Brian Haglid on the Joseph Smith paper. Robin Jensen. And so Robin Jensen and Brian Haglid both disagree with the Egyptologists in the church and say it is clear Joseph and his scribes seem to at least think or believe or want to, and they're not going to use this word, but I'll say mislead people into thinking that the Egyptian symbols in the KEP actually translate to their English counterparts. Not true, though. Okay.
By the way, that's why they have to go to these ridiculous lengths to come up with these ridiculous theories. It's because what it cannot be from the apologist point of view is it cannot be an Egyptian character being put in the margin of a notebook page and then a translation being written out next to it. It cannot be that, because that would prove that Joseph Smith could not translate Egyptian to save his soul. And that's why you see all these different strategies being used to defeat the obvious fact that Joseph Smith was there. I mean, he's the revelator, he's the translator, right? But no, he's doing the translation here. And then he goes off somewhere. And then all the scribes have got nothing to do. So they just look at the book of Abraham and the translation, and they look at some other things that got translated somehow. And now they're just trying to piece it together and retro engineer it to see if they can learn Egyptian. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Why not just ask Joseph Smith?
Yep. So I'll read this again. Some scholars believe they were an attempt to learn Egyptian using the already revealed portions of the Book of Abraham text, though getting it 100% wrong, if that's true. They are assigning the English text to the wrong Egyptian characters.
Yes, absolutely wrong, but that's okay because these are the scribes. These are those rogue scribes. The church has always been blaming rogue people, rogue artists, rogue scribes.
And then others conclude that Joseph and his associates created the Egyptian language documents as part of the process through which Joseph received revelation. So the symbol doesn't actually mean the paragraph of English, but the catalyst theory, if the catalyst theory is true, what they're suggesting here is that Joseph Smith and his scribes are receiving revelation about what the Book of Abraham is, but then just as sort of a fun little time, getting together in the office and assigning each of those paragraphs an Egyptian symbol that has nothing to do with that, but just for shits and giggles.
It might look like he's trying to translate Egyptian from into English, and maybe he is trying to, and maybe he's getting it all wrong, but that doesn't matter. The important thing is that by going through this process, he is attuning his mind to the vibrations of heaven and preparing himself to receive the revelation that God has in store for him. And that revelation, my friend, is the Book of Abraham.
Kudos to you, Joseph Smith, for giving it the old college try. All right, now.
Can you imagine being this bad at doing something, and yet, 200 years later, you got people who believe in you so much that they're willing to make all kinds of dumbass arguments on your behalf?
And the only reason they make all these dumbass arguments on your behalf is because nothing turns out the way we would expect it to turn out if the papyri were the actual damn Book of Abraham. And then they end it here saying, and still others believe that neither of these theories are correct. And I'm in that camp, RFM.
Yeah. You mean like the rest of the world?
All right, there's that. So I've got some slides here just to show for folks who weren't tuned in the other week. I'll flip through these really quick. But
By
this
the way, Bill,
Yeah.
I just decided I'm not going to do those 40 slides. We'll save that for another time. Okay.
Oh, I want to get through some of them.
I
we'll-
know they're great and everything,
Yeah,
but
we'll-
we're already
we'll-
at 52 minutes.
Yeah, we're doing great. Let's get far in as we can. And if you get to a point where we're getting close to the end and you want to call it, we will.
It's your show, and I don't want you to have to rush because I got over exuberant.
No, I'm not rushing here. We've showed these a couple weeks ago. So we'll go through these really quick. The Kirtland Egyptian papers have a symbol in the very far left margin. And then to the right, they have a translation in English of what part of the Book of Abraham that equals. There's a numbering system. So Joseph and his scribes, and some of this is in Joseph Smith's own handwriting. Some of this. So you get an Egyptian symbol that Joseph Smith and his scribes then deem is the number 1, the number 7, the number 32, and so on and so forth. But it's all.
You know why I keep saying look closely when you say Joseph Smith's own handwriting?
Why do you say that?
I keep saying look closely because this is what Jacob Hansen did when he made his video that said, "Man, if this was Joseph Smith's handwriting, this would be a real problem." And he says, and then he says, look closely. The problem is that as Dan Vogel recognized, it was Joseph Smith's handwriting on the very same page of these documents that Jacob Hansen was showing in his video and saying, this would be a real problem if this was, it'd be damning. It'd be pretty damning if this was Joseph Smith's handwriting. And he says, look closely. It actually was Joseph Smith's handwriting. It was a tour de force by Jacob Hansen.
And Hansen does what all fans of the collective witness model do, which is when you're shown to be incorrect, you simply move on to another target. You move away from that, and you never claim you lost the argument to begin with.
Yeah, if you were after the truth, you'd think that might make a dent.
If you're after the truth and you claim if it was in Smith's handwriting, it'd be a problem, and then you learn it's in Smith's handwriting, it should then, by your own logic, be a problem.
Nope, he's off cavorting through the daffodils.
Here we go. So the number system, and you can see clearly here, symbol from the Book of Abraham papyri we do have with an Egyptian the Egyptian symbol in the left margin from that document and the English translation to the right of that. But remember, they decided not to copy the characters from the actual piece of papyri they were translating, or the catalyst theory is true, and somehow God let them think that they were translating Egyptian papyri. It's almost like, hey, little boy, you're doing so great. It's like you're proud of your little 4-year-old because they do something and they're proud of themselves and you want them to feel proud, but they're just not getting it done.
Can I tell you how we know that we have the right papyrus in addition to this?
Well, besides the facsimiles?
Facsimile 1, it's right there.
At the
Jeez,
commencement of
how
this
stupid
record.
do you have to be?
Yeah.
You got the facsimile. Facsimile 1 from the Book of Abraham. It's right there. It's recovered, along with some other papyrus around it with writing on it. So,
And Joseph,
but of course, this is why the apologists start going, well, this picture could be here from, describing a story that's way down the way and not even associated with the text that's around it. That's actually the response because it's such a devastating argument. But when you put that together with these actual figures, these characters, these hieroglyphs being taken sequentially from the papyri, put in the margin in order on the Egyptian alphabet papers, and then translations of the Book of Abraham ensuing, yeah, I think you got a pretty good case.
Yep. All right. So here's another one. Translation manuscript, page 3, symbols. You got the symbols over on the side. You've got the translation next to them.
Mhm.
Here's a whole group of symbols.
And that's a long paragraph.
Yeah, English translation right next to it.
There's a half a page in those symbols.
You've got the Egyptian alphabet, copied characters for Joseph Smith's alphabet.
By the way, I'm so sorry. That is why one of the quotes that you had, somebody had said, quoting Joseph Smith, that by the time he was done translating these, he would have a book that was as big as the Bible.
You see here an entire column becomes the Egyptian alphabet. And so you see there, they take the symbols, they put them over to the edge on another piece of paper, and that is the Egyptian alphabet, when in reality, those symbols are telling an entirely different story in any standard Egyptian funerary text. Here's another one where you can just see multiple symbol after symbol after symbol being used, which has nothing to do, according to them, to the Book of Abraham translation. Here's another one. Here's another one. And you can just see there's so much of this stuff. All right, we can move on from there. So this next section says, does the Book of Abraham use language from the King James Version of the Bible? And it says here, it is natural that the KJV language, or even words and phrases from other sources known to Joseph Smith, would appear in these scriptures.
Absolutely natural. Why would anybody expect anything different? You'd have to be out of your mind to think that King James Bible wouldn't show up in the Book of Mormon.
Book of Abraham, but yes.
Oh, in the Book of Abraham. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, but it's in there too. That's true. The Lord explained that he gives revelation to his servants after the manner of their language, that they might come to understanding. In other words, God works with the prophet as they are. So when Joseph Smith translates the Book of Abraham, it's perfectly allowable that large sections of things from other books, we'll get into some of those, but I'll name one at least, the Adam Clark commentary, might make its way into ancient text being translated by a prophet. So there's that. The Lord explained that he gives this revelation to his servants after the manner of their language, that they might come to understanding. Now I'll just note the kinds of things we're talking about: the Apocrypha, the Book of Josephus, the Book of Jasher, the Adam Clark's commentary, which we mentioned. So there's that. The Book of Josephus, is that the historian Josephus?
Yes. Jewish historian, 1st century.
Why would a Jewish historian's text from slightly after the time of Christ find its way into either Joseph's translation or the ancient text?
Well, without going into too much detail, I want to do an RFM show on this at some point. But Josephus is extremely important. He was a Jewish historian. He was allowed to work with the Romans as they're destroying Jerusalem. He was a scholar. They respected that. I don't know all the details, but he didn't die in Jerusalem. He was smart enough to be on the outside. And he wrote a detailed account of it. Now, he also wrote other accounts of different things. And one of the things which he wrote is, I think it's his book called Antiquities. And he gives a recapitulation of Genesis, at least, and other stories from the Old Testament. That's the Antiquities part, the old stories, right? There's a number of places. We obviously recognize exactly what he's talking about. But he is from the first century, right? He's not writing another book of Genesis, but he's relating the stories that are in Genesis. He's sort of giving a what would you say? It's a secondhand account. He's just sort of putting it in the vernacular. And the thing that's interesting about it is that there are several places where there are variations on the story that we find in Genesis. Okay.
Yep.
And those things are the things that were very interesting to Christians in Joseph Smith's day. In fact, basically everybody had a copy of Josephus. If everybody in Joseph Smith's day was a Mormon, this book was Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie back in the 1970s. Everybody had it. It was like the fifth standard work because it was so significant. And that's mainly the Antiquities part. So you've got a very old witness to Genesis, and it has some variations. And so everybody knows what the variations are. And believe it or not, some of those variations end up showing up in Joseph Smith's Revelation projects. We're not talking about that tonight. Hopefully I'll talk about that at a future time. So having said that about Josephus, did that answer your question? Did I ever get around to it?
Yeah, but I don't know if I caught it. And I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but I'll just say it again, and maybe you can do the best you can with it. A historian writing down his perspective about what the history is behind him in a moment in time long after Christ, but which includes reminiscences either in the cultural narrative or in actual history about who Jesus was and about other things in Judaism or Christianity, other things in the culture. Why would we expect that to show up either in the Book of Abraham or in Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Abraham, when it seems to be, even if it approaches the same topics, seems to be an out of time and out of place historical analysis of things and not belonging either in an ancient text of Abraham for sure, and seems even out of place in a expansion theory translation by Joseph Smith of that ancient text.
All I can tell you is that people in Joseph Smith's day knew about the history of the Bible like people today don't generally know it. They know that the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, is based upon the Masoretic text, which is 1000 CE. They know that Josephus lived 1,000 years before that and had much earlier manuscripts that he learned about the Old Testament / Hebrew Scriptures from, and he's writing down the stories that he has learned from the Scriptures that were available to him. And so once again, Joseph Smith is showing this penchant for whether it's by Josephus, whether it's from Adam Clarke or other sources, trying to go back and drop little seeds of authenticity that he thinks he has found in older sources to seed his scriptures with verisimilitude.
Perfect. Okay. There's that image. All right. So now, what do we know about Joseph Smith's explanations of the Book of Abraham facsimiles? Most of the explanations Joseph published with the facsimiles do not match the interpretations of modern Egyptologists.
Period. End of story. Let's go home. Turn out the lights.
Yeah. And they're at least noting that most, I almost sort of expected that some of the explanations that Joseph published do not match interpretations, but they acknowledge that most, and by the way, when they say most, they mean 99.5% of the translations do not match.
And also when they say most of the explanations don't match, they have undercut any significance of these other things they're going to bring up. Because if these things are not just coincidence, right? These meager, weak, anemic parallels, if these are not proof of any sort, right? If they're not more than coincidence, if they are more than coincidence and they're actually evidence, then everything should match. Or at least 95% or 90%. We'll say, 10%. Maybe the Egyptologists don't have everything right. Maybe there's some marked differences, but it would be 90% would be right. It wouldn't be almost everything wrong, and a few things sort of kind of match. That's the stuff of which coincidence is made. These cannot have any evidentiary value, because if they do, then it should be 90% minimum that match and not just a few.
Yes. And the two things they're going to point to here aren't a direct match. They are a one-off. So it's like Joseph got everything wrong, except for in one place, something is translated as a woven basket, and it turns out to be a plastic bucket. And they go, bullseye. Both of those items hold things, when a woven basket and a plastic bucket are not the same thing. And so that's how this works. So I'll just read this. Most of the explanations Joseph published with the facsimiles do not match the interpretations of modern Egyptologists. However, scholars have noted some parallels. And by the way, when they say that, they're indicating that there's more than the ones they're going to share. But for example, they're going to tell you the two of some parallels that they're noting. When in reality,
this is the best they got, by the way.
Yes, this is the best they got, and these are the parallels. It's not like there's a whole bucket of parallels or a woven basket of them. There is these two that they point to. For example, Joseph Smith described the four figures in Figure 6. This is the canopic jars. These are the organ jars that the Egyptians in the rituals around death and embalmment would have taken the organs of the person and put them into the jars.
And these are actually in facsimile too, standing upside down like bats.
Yes. They are also in facsimile 1, correct?
They are, but they are not described as the earth in its four quarters there.
He has the same item in two images, and he only translates it. He translates them one way in one and does not do it the same in the other.
In facsimile 1, they are listed as the idolatrous god of Mamakra, the idolatrous god of Elkenah, and so forth.
But in facsimile 2, the hypocephalus, the canopic jars are interpreted as this earth in its four quarters. Other scholars have similarly interpreted identical figures in other ancient Egyptian texts, and they leave it there. But what they're not telling you is that the way they're translated in other texts is not directly this earth in its four quarters. It is defined as the four winds. And I have another image here later where I show another translation that sort of is along the same lines. And we'll see that in a moment. Facsimile 1 contains a crocodile deity swimming in what Joseph Smith called the firmament over our heads. And scholars have similarly identified Egyptian conceptions of heaven as a heavenly ocean. So in Egyptian translation, by the way, there's no need to make this argument unless you are trying to support the fact that the actual documents that got translated are the Book of Abraham. This does not support a missing scroll or a catalyst theory.
Right.
This is, we're going to tell you catalyst, we're going to tell you missing scroll, but we're actually going to give you some evidence that maybe it actually is the papyri we do have, and there must be other kinds of meanings to these things, like the Jewish redactor theory, that there's some other degree of meaning here, and that Joseph actually got it right, even though all Egyptologists disagree.
And if these parallels were at all persuasive, you wouldn't have people needing to propose the catalyst theory.
Or a missing scroll, correct. All right, here's one of those. The four sons of Horus. I found this on some site that I don't think has any connection to Mormonism. It was just talking about Egyptian. And the four sons of Horus, the four canopic jars, were noted as the four rudders of heaven. So again, the them
By
calling.
the way, if you go back there, if Joseph Smith had come up with those 4 names for those 4 deities, I would sit up and pay attention.
Yep.
Imseti, Hapi, Dwamutef, and Kebe-Senu, excuse me, Kebe-Senu-F. If he had come up with those, wow. He didn't, though.
We'll have to tackle that at some other point, maybe in this show or maybe somewhere else, Michael, just because of time.
Well, Michael asked, was Joseph this accurate translating the Book of Mormon?
If he was, then he didn't. Then that also requires a catalyst theory or a missing scroll of some sort.
And they may be moving there on the Book of Mormon as well.
Yeah. But I do know
everything that's falsifiable in the church is slowly but surely being moved into the non-falsifiable category.
Yeah. I do
That's
know
why, I'm so sorry, Bill. That's why translation must become revelation. There's too much falsifying going on out there.
Your pauses for dramatic effect sometimes get me. I get pulled in. But I will note,
sometimes in the middle of my drama, I'm just thinking, what the hell am I going to say next?
Yeah, we do. That's how our brains work. The 4 rudders of heaven. I want to give just a little bit of credit. The 4 rudders of heaven being what Joseph Smith called the earth in its 4 quarters. The 4 rudders of heaven. I think there's a way to go. It's maybe.
Well, maybe if those are directional. I don't know what they mean by rudders of heaven. So maybe they think of one in the different quadrants.
But when you realize it's not a direct hit and everything else is a miss, it seems to the average person thinking about this outside the church who doesn't need the church to be true, that when you translate 100 things, that maybe 1 or 2 of them will have some one-off similarity somewhere, especially since both things are religious narratives. The Egyptian funerary documents are their rituals around the dead. It's their plan of salvation. It's their gospel. So when Joseph Smith is putting Mormon gospel into their stories, it makes sense that out of every 100 connections he tries to make, that maybe 1 or 2 of them will have some one-off similarity.
And actually, just being completely frank with you, there's only one similarity between these 4 figures that Joseph Smith interpreted as the earth in its 4 quarters, and that that this website at least interprets as the 4 rudders of heaven. There's only one similarity. 4.
And that's easy because there's 4 jars. So anybody translating this would have named 4 things. Yes.
Yes. I love to count.
If there were 7 jars and everybody said 4 things, now that might be a little more interesting. But because
1984-ish at least.
Yeah, but because there's 4 of them, everyone interpreting this is going to come up with 4 things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way,
did Joseph Smith know there were 4 things there?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah. How did he know it? Here's, I think, the crocodile god Sobek.
Is that a crocodile? That's so cool.
Yeah, I think so.
He looks like he's got a wig or something.
Looks like his snout was almost removed as well.
There's a lot of snout removing going on back in Egypt.
Yeah. And just to note, again, how much did he get wrong? Facsimile. This is facsimile 2, the hypocephalus.
Mm-hmm.
You have Joseph Smith's translation on the left. You have modern Egyptological interpretations on the right. You've got the Book of Abraham facsimile 1. This is Joseph Smith's translation on the left and modern Egyptological interpretations on the right. And there's no matches. You get facsimile 3. Same thing. Joseph Smith versus the Egyptological interpretations are all wrong. There's another Kirtland Egyptian papers. Not sure why that's there. Numbering system again. Okay. This is all coming out of the church's article. This next section, we don't know how the facsimiles relate to the text.
That's crazy.
We do.
Facsimile 1 relates to chapter 1. Facsimile 2 relates to chapter 3. And facsimile 3 relates to a future chapter that never got written, apparently.
Yeah. But on those images, so this sentence, we don't know how the facsimiles relate to the text. That's not true because Joseph Smith tells us both in the Book of Abraham's text, as well as giving the interpretation of the facsimiles, how the facsimiles relate to the text.
Well, if you don't listen to Joseph Smith, you have no idea how the facts, even if nobody said anything, you can tell by looking how they relate to the text. That's how Joseph Smith translated them. He looked at the pictures and he came up with a story.
And then we get into, I think this is the Jewish redactor. So now we have another theory inside this. There is evidence that some Jewish authors, during the era in which the papyri were created, adapted, and incorporated Egyptian drawings and stories into their own sacred text, including those relating to Abraham. It is possible. It is always, anything that's possible is possible. It is possible that these illustrations were repurposed in a similar way. By the way, it's John Gee. I think it might be on the next. I put a link there if somebody wanted to go find an article on the redaction theory.
No, this is Kevin Barney, I think.
Well, the article I found was John Gee, but I think he was quoting Kevin Barney. Yes.
Yeah, this is Kevin Barney's baby.
But I just want to note that they use as evidence, there is one instance or two that has nothing to do with Egyptian funerary text.
Right.
Where a Jewish author takes something from the Egyptians and uses it to tell something along the Jewish religion lines.
Yeah. And one of the famous examples is the parable in Luke, found only in Luke, of the rich man and Lazarus. We won't mention the name of the rich man or the name that tradition came to give him. But that appears to have been based upon an Egyptian story in which, one of them, I can't remember. No, it was Abraham, because remember, the rich man goes and he's resting in the bosom of Abraham. Excuse me, the poor man goes and he's resting in the bosom of Abraham while the rich man is in hell, right? Abraham is played by Osiris in the earlier Egyptian myth. That's a big one for him. The idea of a Hebrew taking this isn't really it's not a drawing, but it's a story, and then Christianizing it.
Yeah. And Dan here is pointing out that there are other similarities in the scriptures with four faces and them representing the four quarters of the earth. So Joseph already had a text that he was familiar with, that he could have pulled a very similar interpretation out, and that when he saw the canopic jars with faces on them, could have easily had him making a connection to the Bible where there's another instance of four faces and those representing the four quarters of the earth. It's a perfect connection. It's a very logical connection for him to make in order to demonstrate that he's translating an ancient text that has biblical themes in nature, and only be pulling it out of his, I'll say hat, but you can fill in the blank there. Okay.
Before we go on from this, I
please.
want to tell the story about Kevin Barney, because it's such a great story, and I have his permission to tell it now. And that is this, that he came up with this idea. Now, imagine how desperate you have to be with the book of Abraham and the different theories being proposed to explain away its deficiencies, to come up with this idea.
Just a second. Yeah. Which is to say what you're saying. Well, you're going to tell the story, but I'll just say what you just said a different way. You have to agree that the translation is not correct, that the catalyst theory has serious flaws with it, and that the missing scroll theory has serious flaws with it. Hence, then you go to this theory.
Yes. Otherwise, you would not create this theory. It would not be necessary. Necessity is the mother of invention, and Kevin Barney came up with this idea. So what he suggested was, and this is also excuse me, what is Dan saying, Bill?
Dan is going back to his previous comment about that Bible connection to the four faces. And he's saying that is laid out clearly in Adam Clark's commentary, which would explain exactly where Joseph Smith got it from.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. So what the heck was I saying? Oh yes, Kevin Barney. So his idea is that he created a Jewish man who lived around 3 centuries before Jesus. In other words, at the same time that we know that this Book of Abraham scroll was created. That's the beauty of it. At least he has a person who's there and supposed to be there. Abraham should have lived 1,500 years or so earlier. So he wasn't around when this thing was created to write it with his own hand, but this other guy was. And he was a Jewish guy and he lived in Egypt. All of this hypothesized completely out of whole cloth. And what this Jewish guy did was he knows somehow about the story about Abraham, and he encodes the story of Abraham in Egyptian and uses these the facsimiles in order to take Egyptian. I hope I'm not screwing this up horribly, Kevin, but using the different commonly understood usages of these symbols in a way that was completely different. Okay. So he used the symbols in a different way, and he is a redactor. Let me back up because I think I got it wrong. What the Jewish person, he's faced with the same situation that we are. He sees these texts, but he redacts them and makes them into the book of Abraham. Okay. He sees these texts as the book of Abraham when no other Egyptian would see them that way. He has the secret gnosis. And that is the same gift and power that was given to Joseph Smith. Now, I'm sure I'm goofing this up a little bit. The key to this is that what Kevin Barney is positing is a person who lived about over 2,000 years ago now, who did to these papyri exactly what the critics think Joseph Smith did to them, which is that he just sort of assigned different meanings to these that no Egyptian would have ever thought of. Joseph Smith was a redactor in the same way that Kevin Barney talked about this ancient Jewish person as being the redactor for the text. And so that's why it's called redaction. Did that have that word in there, Bill? I thought I saw it somewhere. Repurposed in a similar way. Okay, that's the redaction. And he called it J-Red when he would refer to this hypothetical person, capital J-R-E-D, all caps, Jewish redactor. And I was talking to Kevin on the phone. I don't know how I got a hold of him. He used to work for FAIR, Bill. And he's an attorney, works in Chicago, an apologist. Like I said, came up with this whole Jewish redactor theory. And I was talking to him on the phone, and he had been watching the show. I don't know if he still does. But if so, hi, Kevin. And he told me on the phone that, well, first off, I remonstrated with him and I said, well, aren't you adding an extra step here? Why do you have to have this Jewish guy created 2,000 years ago to be the redactor when it could just be Joseph Smith doing the same thing in the 19th century? And Kevin laughed and laughed and laughed. And he said, that's exactly why I call it the J-Red, because it stands for the Jewish redactor, but it can also stand for Joseph is the redactor. And he let me know, if I'm remembering it correctly, in this part, I'm pretty sure I am, that he was positing the existence of a 2,000-year-old redactor to soften the landing for people when they finally found out that it was actually a 19th century redactor named Joseph Smith.
Beautiful. When it comes to the J-Red theory, there is zero evidence that to demonstrate that there is truth to an actual revelation, God approved, being surmised from Egyptian, from which it actually doesn't translate into, but which a redactor then imposes. There's zero evidence of that. But the theory, the way it works is that you actually wouldn't expect any evidence. That's the whole point. Is there is no evidence. That's how it works. The text means something. The translator, either ancient or modern, puts in their own meaning, and nobody else looking at the document could ever surmise that. What it then effectively does is it makes it unfalsifiable. There's no evidence for it. It is not. You're saying. It's like if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, does it make a noise? And in this case, it doesn't make any noise, but you still say, well, yeah, but if we would have been there, we would have known that a tree actually did fall. There's no tree laying around. Nobody heard it. But, if we were there, we would have seen it. The tree fell. And by creating this theory, you essentially make it impossible for a critic to disprove it. because the only person who knows is the redactor and Joseph Smith, and we don't have either of them. And so we should expect to find some other meaning in the language, and we have no way to show you that it's there, but of course it's possible. Of course it's possible. But in the smallest, minutest way that it's essentially it's absurd. There's not any strength of argument here. It is admitting that everything went wrong, and you still need a loophole out of that.
Yeah, I don't think it should be a J read. I think it should be an M read, because obviously this guy was a Mormon, not a Jew.
Mormon redactor. Yeah. We can't prove it's false, but there's zero evidence for it.
The thing is, no, you can't prove it's false. It's unfalsifiable, which means it's meaningless as a belief. An unfalsifiable belief is inherently meaningless.
Yes.
Now, people have them all the time. I may have them. You may have them. Folks out there may have them, but they're not meaningful. If it's unfalsifiable, then who cares?
It's on par with saying that, yes, there are leprechauns. They're invisible. And you just have to trust me that there's leprechauns. And everyone else goes, well, there are no leprechauns. And I go, prove it. And you can't. You can't prove there's no leprechauns. It falls into that you can't prove a negative, which I know sometimes has exceptions, but is true in this instance. You can't prove there are no leprechauns. And especially if I make the added addendum that they're invisible. And that's how the J-read works, is that the interpretation is invisible in terms of linking it to the ancient text. And the only reason we have it visible is because Joseph Smith gave it to us. Otherwise, we have no evidence. All the evidence for such is invisible.
I want to reframe what I said, because I think I can say it better. And
Please.
I may have said it too broadly. I said unfalsifiable beliefs are unimportant. I think that unfalsifiable beliefs can be among the most important beliefs we have on a personal nature and on a personal basis, and perhaps on a relationship basis, but they probably should not be used in the public sphere for any particular persuasive effect, like setting of policy.
Yes, they should be unconvincing to anyone else. They're inside your head.
The other thing we have to understand, and this just came to me, that when the LDS Church modifies its position to make it unfalsifiable, that means we win. We just won. We just checkmated them. So what they have to do is they have to move their king into a place they can try and keep it from being taken. It's never taken, right?
Yeah.
It's never taken at the end of chess. It's just in a position where it's in check and it cannot move out of check. That's what this is.
Yeah. Because I'm a little less erudite than you, I'll relate it to checkers. It's that moment in checkers where you beat them, but both sides just keep going back and forth. You're in a position where you simply move, and then they move, and then you move, and they move, but it's just back and forth in the same place over and over and over again. And you're beat, but not really. And every Mormon position gets taken to that place.
Yes. It's about that point that I just throw the entire board in the air.
Yeah. Yep. You lost. Admit it. Let's end this game and move on and get some ice cream. Okay.
I will end this game thus.
Ta-da. All right. Apologetics Masterclass, a little connection there to the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. Notice the seer stone up there, translated, facsimile. He's pulling the knobs, but everybody looks forward and believes the thing. Has the church been transparent about what we know about the papyri and their contents? Please, RFM.
Okay. This is the funniest part of the entire thing. If you're still with us, it will be worth it now, because in a document, in an essay, where the church, and we've just been showing you how the church is not being transparent about what they know about the papyri and their contents. They're going to ask the question, because a lot of people have this question apparently, and they want to answer it. So they ask the question for them. Has the church been transparent about what we know about the papyri and their contents? Answer, yes. That
does it. Throughout its history, the church has publicly shared its knowledge about the Egyptian text that are related to the book of Abraham.
Why does a yes need this much explanation if it's not a lie?
Yeah.
Just asking for a friend.
Yeah.
It should be yes, period. Not yes, period. And now let me explain why it is that that's not a horrible lie, I'm telling you.
Throughout its history, the church has publicly shared its knowledge about the Egyptian texts that are related to the book of Abraham. The church had 2 Egyptian papyrus rolls and fragments of a third from 1835 to 1847.
So
I just want to note,
they want credit for that?
in the midst of everything missing, the church acknowledges it had 2 Egyptian papyrus rolls and fragments of a third from 1835 to 1847.
Think how bad your position has to be when part of your defense is something that everybody agrees on and nobody cares about. So you had possession of them from 1835 to 1847. So what?
Hold on. Many were lost. But let's go back to what they said. The church had 2 Egyptian papyrus rolls and fragments of a third. Then it says, blah, blah, blah. This went here and that went there. And then many were lost. Except even today, we still have 2 rolls, a fragment of a third, the hypocephalus. I don't know. They're just, I don't know what it is, but it seems like this, at least in some way, seems to contradict what was said at other parts in this article.
Well, I think basically what we have is almost 50% or 50, it's about half of what Joseph Smith had, I believe. And based on what we have, we know the parts that are missing.
When you
Do I
say
have that
half,
right?
when you say half, are you including the things that are missing, but which we have visual reproductions of that were made contemporary to Joseph Smith? In other words, the hypocephalus. Are you including that in the half of the stuff
Yes.
that's lost?
Yes.
Yes. When in reality, it's not lost. I mean, it's lost. The original document's lost. But what it looked like in our ability to examine it and to compare it with Egyptological understanding is not lost. How much do we have that we can give Egyptological understanding to, even if the original document is lost? And that's where I say we have 80% of it.
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
Only
if 200 years from now they find, or even today, we find an old copy of Tom Sawyer, right? But we only have the first half. Well, we have a pretty good idea what the second half is going to be because all we have to do is look at other copies.
Yep. Okay. Only a small portion of the 2 papyrus rolls and various papyrus fragments held by Joseph Smith are known to have survived.
That seems to be overstating it. Did you say bullshit?
I said bullshit.
Oh.
In 2018, the Joseph Smith papers published new images and analysis of these fragments. By the way, I want to say thank you. Let's go over a couple of things here really quick. Thanks for all the research you guys do, Josh Kim. Guy McDude, XMOs, PostMos use mental gymnastics too. The tendency to rationalize, and we don't support valued online content as our Mormon counterparts would. Excuse me. Fred sent a $5 super sticker. Michael, $50. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Kobe Reddish, just another rando there. Still waiting on that Book of Abraham response, Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob's already declared victory and left the field after avoiding the debate on the one issue that Mormonism rises or falls on, the Book of Mormon.
And then Guy McDude said, I want to know the Book of Abraham mysteries that are withheld.
There's a lot of them, and they're good.
Michael says, was Joseph this accurate translating the Book of Mormon? We read that one already.
Every bit. He was exactly this accurate in translating the Book of Mormon.
Joey Smith said, back in my day, the church knew exactly how the papyri were related to the Book of Abraham. Now they don't know.
Yes, we did. And we also knew when where the Book of Mormon took place, and especially that final battle on the Hill Cumorah in upstate New York.
Michael, another $50. Thank you again, Michael. This is why it is hard to be sympathetic to the church. They lie and gaslight, and then when you call them on it, they create a whole new story. C. Wheeler, just so happy I finally made a live broadcast. You all are so great. So thank you. And then I just want to note here, I'll put up on the screen Let me get this first one here. All right, let me add this. So just want to note to folks, RFM and I will be in Salt Lake City on August 2nd. That is Saturday night from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. There's already about 20 tickets sold for this. I think there's 60 tickets total. So there's 42 more tickets to go. If you do want to show up at this, dinner is included. Anything you want to say about this event, RFM?
That's going to be great. I'm really excited and looking forward to meeting a bunch of listeners.
Yep. And so I'll get that one out of the way, and I'll put links in the live chat here before the show is over. And then I'll just note, we just added this. Rebecca and you were talking on Monday night at the Mormon newscast and suggested that while we have you in town and we're in Rebecca's back neighborhood, that we have a second event. Do you want to talk at all about this one?
Yes, it's actually at Rebecca's house.
No, it's not.
It's not?
That would be great. No.
Oh, dang it. That would be so much fun. Everybody would love to come and just hang out at Rebecca's house until all hours. No, this is going to be on Monday. It's going to be, so the 4th of August.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturday's the 2nd, and then Monday's going to be the 4th. And what we're going to do is we've got a place rented where it's sort of a theater. It's a small theater. I think, is it called the Black Box, downtown Salt Lake City? It was something like that.
Yes, there are a couple places called the Black Box, though. So make sure you get the address off of this registration.
You'll have to have a ticket first anyway to get in there, and it'll have all the information on it.
It will.
But we're going to, the plan is, and we're determined to make it happen, that on that Monday night, Bill, I, and Rebecca Biblioteca will be live broadcasting the Mormon newscast with a live studio audience.
Yes, and so you have a chance to come to this. This will be a little less expensive. It won't last quite as long and not as much time to interact with us, but it's a little less expensive. And so for those who maybe saw the cost of the other event is too high, this would be a chance. We will have a little munch and mingle, kind of an LDS little theme to it. We kind of meet and greet afterward, and there will be some refreshments there to partake of as well. And we're really excited for both these events. And I think, folks, you got to utilize this. You've got RFM in town. He doesn't live in this neck of the woods. And while he's here and you get a chance to meet him, you get a chance to sit down with me and Rebecca, and you get a chance to enjoy the Mormon newscast. So what a cool opportunity for that. And then also for that Saturday night event, which will be a lot of fun as well. And so we're really grateful for everybody who is already signed up for that. And you should get your tickets for these as soon as you can. There were 60 tickets total available for Saturday night, and there are already 20 sold, so about 40 left. And this event, there will only be 50 tickets available. And so you better grab those as soon as you can. So hopefully we'll see you guys there.
It's going to be a busy time, and I'm looking forward to it very much.
All right. Now, okay, we've talked about all of that. So here we go. How many of the papyrus fragments are missing today? Scholars.
That answers a whole lot of them. In fact, they're almost all missing.
It's got to be most of them, right? They've said most of them are missing. Scholars generally agree that the papyri now in existence represent only a fraction.
99/100ths is a fraction. I keep saying it. A fraction doesn't mean a small amount.
A fraction of the two original scrolls and other fragments originally acquired by Joseph Smith and the church. What we have today.
That's like when you say, when somebody asks you how many times have you read this book or whatever, and you say a number of times, and you say, really? How many? And he goes, one.
Yeah.
Well, it's a number. One is a number, Bill.
Yeah. Except
this is how we mislead people with words.
Except the church is saying that they read most of the book when they only turned a few pages. It's actually the other way around. But yes, it's distorted. It's not the truth. They say here, scholars generally agree that the papyri now in existence represents only a fraction of the two original scrolls and other fragments originally acquired by Joseph Smith and the church. That's technically true, but the image they're trying to paint isn't true. What we have today range from as little as 2.5%. Now, the only way
that's a John Gee estimate.
But John Gee has already admitted since then that he was wrong about his math calculations. You don't let an Egyptologist do your math for you.
No, or a lawyer.
John Gee no longer holds that the scroll would have been 40 feet long. He doesn't believe that anymore. So why is the church still touting his disagreed upon scholarship by himself? He's the one who disagrees with it.
Because it makes the 30 or 45 look less accurate, and a midpoint is drawn subconsciously in the reader's mind between the two.
Yeah. To as much as 30 or 45% of the papyrus in Joseph's possession. Now, to this extent, this is closer to the truth. But what they're also not telling you is that much beyond that 30 or 45%, we still have as visual reproductions Facsimile 3, Hypocephalus, that are accurate to what it would have looked like in that original piece, and hence we do have something to go off of far beyond the 30 or 45%.
Yes, except for the slave.
Yes, except for Olish. Yep.
Olishem.
All right. Is the Book of Abraham consistent with what we know about the ancient Near East? The plain of Olishem, for instance,
One of my favorite plains.
Has been connected by some scholars to a town in northwestern Syria called Ulusum.
Well, that sounds exactly the same. Could you say that again?
The plain of Olishem has been connected by some scholars to a town in northwestern Syria called Ulusum.
Okay, I'm convinced.
Yeah, we'll find out here in a minute that there are even more problems than just the spelling and pronunciation of this proposed location.
This is a very plausible match. It's not just plausible, folks. It's very plausible.
Following standard linguistic practices. In other words, Ulusum could be Olishem if you allow for this and that and this culture and how they do this and this little practice here.
Obviously, you got to do something because they're not really identical yet.
Similarly, the god Elkanah has been suggested by some Latter-day scholars to represent a shortened form of the divine title El Kone Artsu. So I don't know what that is, which is known from a variety of Northwest Semitic inscriptions and means something like El, creator of the earth.
Who should have his own idolatrous god.
So let's play this. What do you want to say
about God? They're talking about Elohim. They're talking about Elohim 1.0. El, creator of the earth, the Canaanite deity from which the Jews took theirs. And the rest was history.
Elohim would be closer than Elkanah. Elkanah is an Egyptian god. He's one of the isn't he one of like the idols essentially that Abraham is? Yeah.
The idolatrous god of Elkanah.
Yeah. Which is not the same as El, creator of the earth.
But you know that Jewish redactor, I'm sure he would see it that way. Not.
What does John Gee think of Olishem?
Okay. Look, this is the only thing I want to do for my slides, okay? Tonight, okay? But I think it is funny. Because here's the thing. If you go back, there's only one person. Well, there's another person who discovered this like back in a long time ago. Can't remember when it was. Might have been 75 or something. And his name might have been Lundquist. But the main guy who has been the proponent of the Plains of Olishem connection, okay, has been John Gee. Over and over and over again, he brings it forth as evidence for the Book of Abraham. And what ends up happening now is that 3+ years ago, he's being interviewed by Scott Gordon, I think it was. It was a fair Mormon interview of Scott Gordon, the president, right, Bill?
Scott Gordon, president of Fair Mormon.
With John Gee. And he's talking about this Plains of Olishem thing. Now, from John Gee's point of view, okay, other than the fact that it's the wrong name at the wrong time in the wrong place, it's a bullseye. It is the wrong name. It is the wrong time. This is from like 2250 BCE. And it's like 400 years before Abraham. So 400 years may not seem like a lot when you're looking back that far in time. But 400 years ago, Shakespeare had just written all of his plays and passed away. That's how long a period of time 400 years is.
There was no United States of America.
Correct.
Yeah.
There was no radio for Mormon. If you can imagine such a thing. And it's the wrong place. because the plains of Elisham have to be, at a minimum, according to the text of the Book of Abraham, in the land of Ur. They got to be in the land of Ur. Okay. And even though the Mormon apologist is always going to pick the northernmost location proposed for Ur rather than the southernmost location, which I really think the majority of scholars go for the southernmost, they have to go northernmost just because of the Book of Abraham. But even if they go to the northernmost location, this is still nowhere near. None of the proposed sites for Ulisum are within anything that even John Gee could, with a straight face, say is in the land of Ur, even the northmost Ur. And therefore, in this interview, he backs off of it and basically says, I don't buy this anymore. I mean, there would have to be another proposed location that actually ends up being the correct location for Ulisum, which is attested in ancient texts. That's how they know it existed. In the land of Ur, otherwise no dice. So these are not evidence. So the funny thing is that John Gee was the main proponent. He has backed off on it now. And yet, the church will still use it as an evidence for the Book of Abraham, even though its chief proponent is now soft pedaling it. By the way, bro, when you start this, can you put it 1.5? He's very slow, and it makes it go by faster. How long is this? Do you even know?
I don't know, but I definitely want to get through this. And I, if you're okay with it, I really want to get to the Leiden Papyrus I-384 and talk about Kerry Molstein's, as an Egyptologist, inability to read Egyptian. Because I think it's important that he makes a claim about what Egyptian says when he is dead wrong.
Okay.
So let's do that. And then I just want to note, before I play this audio, if you listen to this and you see John Gee acknowledging that this isn't the right place, time, whatever the third thing was you said, I'll just note, if they play this loose with this, might some similarities be seen in how they find an evidence in Nahum, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
When you're willing to take anything that is even remotely possibly close as an evidence, then you have to start looking at the other evidence they present and see if they're playing just as loose with that. So here is John Gee.
Of Abraham. Now, at this point, I've been teasing you long enough about this audio clip, so I'm going to play this.
So I'm going to push pause for just a second. So I can speed it up.
Play this audio clip from the interview that went up at Pearl of Great Price Central last Friday night. And here's John Gee finally coming clean about the fact that John Gee himself does not think that Ulisum is the same place that is mentioned in the Book of Abraham. Here it is. Pay close attention. This one is for the record books. Play the tape.
What new things have we learned about the Book of Abraham as scholars have looked at it closely?
So what have we learned what are some of the new things we've learned through scholarship on the Book of Abraham? Well, a lot of them have to deal with historical authenticity. So looking at some of the names, there's a place that's mentioned in Abraham 1:10, Elisham. And this is actually John Lundquist back in, I think it was the 1970s, noticed that this is an actual place name. And it was attested in one inscription by Rim-Sin. Just this year, a new inscription of Rim-Sin's mentioning Elisham also showed up. And there's been, if you look at this place in the scholarly literature among the cuneiform specialists, there's a lot written on it. But this is an actual place name. And they debate about exactly where you're going to find it, and archaeologists debate. And so one of them said, yeah, I think I've discovered it. And another one says, no, I don't think you did. And these are both archaeologists on the same dig. They're teammates, but they don't agree on that interpretation.
They literally don't even agree on where they're digging, on the name of it.
The name of it, well, that's because they haven't found the name. They know the site they're digging, and one of them says, I think it's this place, and the other says, no, I think it's this place that's mentioned in the literature. But if they do find the place, and you've actually got an archaeological site, what does this tell you about the Book of Abraham? So while I was cautiously optimistic when this first came out, and although I don't think that I think it's unlikely that that's the correct location, the mere fact that you got a location and learning about that particular location let me see certain things about the text of the Book of Abraham that I hadn't seen before. Because this site is located on a plain. So in the Book of Abraham, it talks about this being on the plains of Olishem. And it's the largest mound on that plain. Now, maybe the plain is not the right plain, but thinking about it as if we're looking for it, we should be probably looking for a plain that has a very large mound in it that serves as the largest city in the area and dominating the other cities, and that those plains are named after it because it is the largest location there. And I wouldn't have been thinking along those lines if I hadn't had to confront the archaeological arguments that were made. And even if I am less inclined to think that they're accurate right now, that that's the right place, it's still going to be something like it. And so even in this case, what may be a false clue is still useful in understanding the text and seeing it as a real place.
So not once but twice does John Gee actually state that he does not think it likely that any of the proposed locations for Ulisum are the Olishem mentioned in the Book of Abraham. They are all in the wrong place. None of them are close enough to northernmost Ur to make it match the Book of Abraham. So what does this mean? What this means to me is that this is not something that John Gee just stumbled upon last Friday night. This is something that John Gee has known about for many, many years. I mean, the northernmost location of Ur hasn't changed in decades. The different proposed locations for Ulisum have not changed in decades. John Gee has known about these locations for literally decades, and he has known that none of the proposed locations for Ulisum are close enough to Ur in the north to be a viable candidate for Olishem in the Book of Abraham. And yet, every time that I can tell when John Gee is asked what are the strongest evidences for the Book of Abraham, boom, first or second out of the chute is going to come the plains of Olishem. Why does he do that? Why does he cite to Olishem as an evidence for the Book of Abraham when he knows that it is not an evidence for the Book of Abraham, when even in his own personal opinion, the Ulisums that have been proposed do not match the plain of Olishem mentioned in the Book of Abraham? And this is where we get to the nub of the matter. The reasonable answer to me is that John Gee, even though he knows and personally believes that Book of Abraham, Olishem, is not Ulisum as proposed by all these different scholars, he is nevertheless willing to put it forward as an evidence of the Book of Abraham. He knows it's not an
I saw you move your hand. Is that far enough, or do you want me to play more?
I think that'd be absolutely fine. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for the focus. That's probably plenty far. And I don't know. I had an end timestamp on it. I don't know if it blew through it, but yeah. So that's the problem. And so I thought of that mainly because what I said then over 3 years ago, I think this was in 2020, what I said back then about John Gee using Olishem as an evidence for the Book of Abraham, in spite of the fact that he knows that he is personally unconvinced that it is an evidence for the Book of Abraham, has now been replicated again in this newest Book of Abraham question and answer essay, where they're putting it forward as an evidence for the Book of Abraham. And I'm just wondering why.
Dan said that was Gee at 1.25, and I said, no, Dan, that was Gee at 1.5. Man, was that slow. You could see the difference in your speaking and his. He still sounded like he was trying to figure out what he was going to say each word after the next. He was sort of getting stammering and getting trapped up on what he was trying to say. So
it took him forever to get to that point that he did not want to admit to.
Yeah. So there's that. All right. Let me get to this next one. Take that down. And by the way, thank you to the last couple of ones that have come in. JD became a YouTube member. Thank you, JD Dutra. He put $100 in. Love you guys. Thanks for all you do. Scott Sanders, another $5. The Book of Abraham broke my shelf. Thanks for the focus. So here we get to the Leiden Papyrus I-384. Abraham.
This is your favorite papyrus. You just love saying the Leiden Papyrus.
This is my favorite for the reason that you made notes about. This is why I like this. Because Kerry Molstein claims to be an Egyptologist, and he is. He is by trade. He's got a degree. He's been to a couple of good schools. He's read a few good books. He is no dodo. But he, as an Egyptologist, seems to be a bumbling fool in what he did with this. And he still has never come out and corrected the record, and it still gets thrown out and used as evidence. So he says, now this isn't he, the church says in their article, Abraham's father Terah, being an idolater, a famine striking Abraham's hometown, and an angel rescuing Abraham from human sacrifice at the hands of an Egyptian pharaoh. Sorry, let me start over. Because that's mid-thought. Some of the general themes and narrative structure of the Book of Abraham parallel stories from ancient non-biblical sources. Now, that's true. These include Abraham's father Terah being an idolater, a famine striking Abraham's hometown, and an angel rescuing Abraham from human sacrifice at the hands of an Egyptian pharaoh. Ancient texts also refer to Abraham instructing the Egyptians about the heavens. Now, before I get to their example, I want to say that's true what they said to some extent. What they're saying is that the Book of Abraham has proposed historical data points in it that we now know, long after Joseph Smith's life, have some basis in history. Whether true or not, they have been repeated in some form in other places. And you are being left as the reader to then make the connection, because of how the church words it, that Joseph's a prophet. And he couldn't have known, and they magically show up, and he had no way to know that they should be there other than God told him. What they failed, go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead, please.
What they fail to tell you is that these same data points are found in contemporary sources, such as the ones I showed you earlier. The Adam Clarke's commentary, the book of Josephus, the book of Jasher, and the Apocrypha. All books that Joseph Smith not only had access to, but which some of these we can demonstrate that he had in his possession and read from. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. Somebody should go to prison over this sentence. Ancient texts, as I say these two, ancient texts also refer to Abraham instructing the Egyptians about the heavens. For example, Eupolemus, who lived under Egyptian rule in the 2nd century BC, wrote that Abraham taught astronomy and other sciences to the Egyptian priests. Period. Then it moves on to another thought. Okay? Now, the fact is that this story was very famous and widely distributed and occurs in Josephus, which Joseph Smith had a copy of. And the writer of this essay knows both of those facts, that it's in Josephus and that Joseph Smith had a copy of it. And yet they don't cite to Josephus as a source for the story. Instead, they cite to somebody I'd never heard of before, Eupolemus, that Joseph Smith would not have had access to, in order to give you the false impression that this story was available in an extra biblical text to which Joseph Smith had no access. Therefore, how could he have known?
Yeah, and just to hammer this point home, if you go into the translation and historicity of the Book of Abraham, this is the gospel topic essay, and you go to footnote 46, the very last footnote.
The very last half of the very last footnote.
It says some of these extra biblical elements were available to Joseph Smith through the books of Jasher and Josephus. Joseph Smith was aware of these books, but it is unknown whether he utilized them. Not whether he read them, not whether he had access to them, but whether he utilized them to put these components into the narrative. Well, how could we know? It's either revelation or he stole them, plagiarized them, and we can't know which.
On the last day that Joseph Smith was alive, between John Taylor singing A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief and the occupants of the jail cell drinking some wine, Hiram Smith read to everybody from a particular book. Do you know what book that was, Bill?
I'm going to guess it was the book of Josephus or the book of Jasher.
It was Josephus.
I was going to try to find that. You had a slide for that.
Josephus was the last thing that Joseph Smith had read to him. I think Hiram read the Book of Mormon the day before.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, 3:00 p.m. 3:15 p.m. Oh, go ahead. You want to read that, Bill?
No. It's your source. Go ahead.
Okay. This is from the outline, the timeline that's put together over, I think it was at Meridian Magazine. The prisoners at Carthage jail overhear threats from the guards. John Taylor sings A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief 2 times. Hiram reads Josephus. And I think they just put in there to explain a first century historian. And then 5 to 6 p.m., wine is brought in for the prisoners in the upper room of the jail, and Joseph Smith, Taylor, and Richards tasted of the wine to lift their spirits. And then things go downhill from there.
Now, the apologists would run in and go, yeah, but this is in Carthage at the time of his death. The Book of Abraham's already been translated. So reading it in the Carthage jail isn't evidence of reading it earlier.
Neither is reading the Book of Mormon in the Carthage jail then. Checkmate, apologists.
But reading it shows that they found this book to be an influence to them.
And comfort.
It's not the first time they read it. You're not going to argue that, are you, apologists? It's not the first time.
This is like the newest Stephen King novel.
All right. Sorry, folks. Close your eyes for 2 seconds.
Don't look.
And then I'll get back to where we were.
Hey, we're getting motion sick.
Yeah,
I really went crazy, didn't I?
All right. So when the components of the narrative that you claim are miraculous because they're not biblical show up in all kinds of sources that Joseph Smith had access to, seemed to have read, was influenced by, you've created what you call evidence that's really just nothing, and if anything is actually proof of plagiarism more than what you would like it to be. Yeah. Okay. A 3rd century
Can you imagine being an apologist? And the allegation is that Joseph Smith borrowed from Josephus and some of the variants in the Old Testament stories to spice up his own translation projects. Just imagine that's the allegation, and there's evidence that's adduced in favor of it. And then the apologist says, well, you don't know that he had a copy of Josephus. Well, this is evidence that he did, by the way, and pretty much everybody did have a copy. But okay, if you need something, here he is actually having it read to him in the jail cell the day he dies in Carthage. And then the response from the apologist is, well, you don't know he had it before then. I mean, at some point, it becomes absolutely ridiculous.
And Vogel's comment here might even be just as important.
Thank you.
Oliver Cowdery refers to Josephus in the December 1835 Messenger and Advocate while he was describing the papyri.
Is that the Tower of Enoch reference, Dan?
And I'll also ask, Dan, is that part of the same document that I showed earlier and in the previous episode where Cowdery says there were 2 rolls and maybe 2 to 3 other fragments, other pieces? I think it might be that article that he refers to it. So anyway, Dan, if you could answer those 2 questions, much appreciated. All right, let me grab that comment off. A 3rd century, I'll let you take over here. This Leiden I3.
This is a quote from the same article that just appeared on the church's website not that long ago that we've been talking about. They say a 3rd century BC papyrus from an Egyptian temple library mentions the name Abraham with an illustration similar to Facsimile 1 in the Book of Abraham. And you have supplied the pictures. By the way, all the pictures being supplied were supplied by Bill. They don't appear in this. They're not helpful. So they don't use the pictures because the pictures don't help support their story. Just like this picture doesn't, unless you don't know anything about what it means. So down here we have a lion couch, right? It is not an altar. It is a lion couch, and on it is a mummified person. And underneath it is some writing. And in the writing, you can see a red square around a certain part of the writing, and that it contains the name Abraham or Abraham. Okay. But basically, everybody understands it to be Abraham. But you notice there's other writing that doesn't have a red square around it, and that ends up becoming quite important. So here is our hero, Carrie Muhlstein.
That look at facial expression is perfect for the blunder that this ridiculous man claiming to be the expert in Egyptology on the Book of Abraham, the mistake that he makes.
Well, he's taken better pictures, I think, but I hear what you're saying. So this is an article that he wrote when he presented at the proceedings of the International Conference of Russian Academy of Sciences Center for Egyptological Studies. And yay, Pillar of Enoch, not the Tower of Enoch. Okay, thank you. Achievements and Problems of Modern Egyptology. Anyway, this is back about 15, 16, 17 years ago that he's there, and he presents a paper, which he writes, and it's titled, Abraham, Isaac, and Osiris-Michael. The use of biblical figures in Egyptian religion, a survey. Now, when he writes this, he's writing this in order to write an Egyptological adjacent article. And he's going to put at least one point in there that he's going to use in order to quote it later in support of the Book of Abraham. But he's counting on all these people not to know that that's what he's doing. And by and large, why would they? He is seeding his papers that are printed in academic venues with quotes to use for the Book of Abraham. So he's got to sneak them in there. And this is the one here, okay? Here he writes, here we would typically expect to identify the figure with Osiris, but the text notes that it is Abraham on the couch. Okay, this is where he went too far. Because the text does not say Abraham on the couch. It simply says Abraham. And there was one time in a video where he made the same error, that he translated the writing as saying Abraham on the couch, when that's not what it means. If it meant that, it would mean something. And I can see why he wants it really bad to mean that, but it doesn't. The problem here is that even though it's not in quotation marks, he repeats the same error, and he's not able to avail himself of the same excuse he used for his offhand comments, which is that they were offhand comments and that he misspoke, because here he planned it out and wrote it for an article.
By the way,
The
this
text notes that it is Abraham on the couch. And then he gives his footnote, right? The footnote is to the actual papyrus itself, and then to two important articles by an Egyptologist named John Gee.
This is a big deal. So when we played this the first time, you and I did several episodes on the Book of Abraham several years ago in podcast form, audio only. And if you want to go find those, the thumbnail for it is just a ton of different things from the Book of Abraham. You and I actually point out one piece of evidence that still the apologists haven't used, which actually would be more appropriate, which is one of the figures who seems to be praying in connection with something being talked about in the translation in terms of Abraham or someone praying in the text.
Right.
And they would be well off to actually utilize that, and make sure you give us credit. We do not want you using that connection unless you credit us for coming up with it. I want to make sure
if you have an Egyptian figure in its profile and it's standing with one foot in front of the other, as a lot of them are, and it has his hands up like this, you can't do it like this. That means to pray. That's one of the meanings of that, because you're in the attitude of prayer. And if you look at the figure that's identified as Abraham, who's actually Hor on the couch in Facsimile 1, that is his figure, except he is on his back on the lion couch, which he has to be. So it looks like this was a compromise, or maybe they did it commonly, to put him on his back, because he has to be on the back on the lion couch, but he is in the position of prayer, which is why he has that strange position of having one foot above the other, because that's what it would look like if he were standing on it.
And I found those are Radio Free Mormon episodes 60, 61, and 67. The Book of Abraham, Missing Scrolls, Catalyst Theories, and Bad Apologetics, part 1, 2, and 3. I'm not exactly sure which one it is in, but in one of those is the video footage that RFM just mentioned, where Carrie Molstein is being is a presenter in a video that's apologetic evidence for the Book of Abraham, and Mike Ash is saying some things, and then Carrie comes in and says about this image that this image says Abraham upon the couch. And that's clearly not true. I'll let you explain what it actually does say and what's going on there. But it is to note what you just said is really important. That could have just been a blunder. He's on the spot. He's being recorded. Nobody goes back to fix it. He realizes right after that he misspoke. Okay. But when you write a paper and you say it in the paper, that's methodical. That is intentional. That's not a misspoke. That's not misspeaking. That's you writing down a false data point that you either thought was true or wanted to put across as true because you thought nobody could prove it wrong.
But once it's written and once it's published, now you can quote it, and it's authoritative, even though it's incorrect. You see, he quotes from John Gee. He quotes from Insights, which was the farm's newsletter. And most impressive of all, he quotes from the Ensign, the July 1992 issue, in which John Gee had an article.
What is actually going on here? Why is Abraham in this below this lion couch? It does seem like a bullseye. There's Abraham's name and there's a lion couch. By the way, it looks like it's Anubis standing up next to the lion couch with the dead person.
It is. Snout intact. That's supposed to be Anubis.
Yeah. What's going on here, RFM?
Well, Robert Rittner addressed this in two rather lengthy paragraphs from his paper responding to the church's Gospel Topics essay on the Book of Abraham, in which he said, except for those willfully blind, the case is closed. This is the name of it. It is available on the University of Chicago website. It's called Translation and Historicity of the Book of Abraham, which is the name of the essay. And then he says, A Response by Robert K. Rittner. So let's see here. I'm starting to get, which is funny because you've been doing all the talking. He says the web posting, that means the essay, which is posted on the web. The essay notes also two writings by John Gee purporting to prove a memory of the sacrifice of Abraham by Pharaoh in later Egypt. It is not fully accurate to claim that the 3rd century Demotic papyrus, that's the papyrus that we have, from which the Book of Abraham was translated. It's in Demotic. That's the form of Egyptian. It is not fully accurate to claim that the 3rd century Demotic papyrus cited by Gee connects Abraham with an illustration similar to Facsimile 1 in the Book of Abraham. Okay? The text in question, and actually the 3rd century Demotic papyrus, that might have been not the Book of Abraham papyrus, but the Leiden papyrus. Okay. The text in question, a Leiden magical papyrus in Demotic Egyptian, yes, and Greek, does include a picture of a mummy attended by Anubis, mentioned by name, on a lion funerary couch, not an altar, because the essay calls it an altar, which is begging the question. It's a couch. It's not an altar for sacrifice. But the text is a love compulsion spell. It's a love charm intended to force a woman to submit to a male's sexual lust. That's what that language is that has the name Abraham in it. Not a reflection of the Book of Abraham. As accompanying magical words of power, accompanying to Abraham, the speaker recites a string of abracadabra words, which does include Abraham, A-B-R-A-A-M. And this spelling has been corrected to Abraham in a recent edition. But it says Agio, Oryx, Thambito, Abraham, O, Epi, and it goes on. Then Plano, yeah. Oh boy, that's a tough word. You want to try that one, Bill? Plano, yeah, Gux, E, Bioth. Yeah. It's not easy for me to say. So Abraham is one name in a list of magical names to which this person attributes magical powers in a love charm. And that's why they're included there as a chant of some sort, as an incantation, as a spell. However, the name Abraham is just one of a string of magical names and no more relevant to the image than these other two names that I struggled through earlier. Moreover, there is no intent here to represent a sacrifice. It is not a sacrifice. They didn't have human sacrifice in ancient Egypt. Just Osiris tended by Anubis, who are both invoked to inflame the libido of the female victim of the spell. The body on the lion bed is certainly that of the deceased Osiris, as it is in Hor's vignette. That's Facsimile 1. That's the Mormon reference. Not a threatened Abraham. Okay, he's not Abraham. It's Osiris who is representing the deceased Hor. The resurrection, we are resurrected through Osiris's resurrection. That sounds familiar, I'm sure it's a coincidence. In combination with other borrowed Old Testament names, Abraham, in varying spellings, occurs as a name of power throughout the magical papyri, but there is no special connection with the lion bed. In another papyri, the magician invokes Zeus by declaring some words. For I am, see, this is very, very deep, and I don't know these languages, and I apologize. And they're very long and multisyllabic words. Mixing into the middle of the list a snippet of the Jewish blessing, Baruch Adonai Eloi Abraham, which is blessed be Yahweh, King, God of Abraham. In another papyrus, the famous name Abraham begins a string of protective names. What he's showing is that this isn't the only time that Abraham has been used in Egyptian papyruses from this time period as a protective charm or as having magical properties. It doesn't have anything to do with the lion couch on the same papyri. Okay, that's what he's trying to say. Then he goes on, he says, here, let me turn to the next page. Most commonly, Abraham is invoked together with Isaac and Jacob, as in the long list of magical names. And then he quotes them there. I'm going to go to the last sentence. The use of the name Abraham in all of these magical passages derives from late Egyptian knowledge of the Hebrew Bible and contemporary Jewish tradition, not from an apocryphal book of Abraham. That's the main point he's driving at.
All I'll say here is that while they find the name Abraham on a couple of documents that also tie into Egyptian, not one of them is ever Abraham as a figure from the Bible being referenced as having anything to do with the actual narrative being told through the images on the document. That it's always some secondary tangential meaning, such as being part of a magic spell. It's a misuse as if it's stronger evidence than what it is. It's interesting, but it isn't strong enough to make any real connection to Egyptian funerary documents having any connection to Abraham.
Yes.
So anyway, I'll just that.
And then there were a couple of slides here which go back to the actual text of the new document, the question and answer. So I was going to skip the rest of my slides since we're at 2 hours and 15 minutes and just finish with what we started with. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Okay.
All right. So here we are. I think we're wrapping up at this point. I'll just note that the call-in line is open, 662-667-6667. And I will put into the live chat the link that you can come into the studio if you want to do that. We'd love to hear your feedback on this church article that attempts to add every apologetic argument with a carefully worded script, as if non-evidence is evidence, as if contradictions don't matter, as if the problems can be just brushed away. It says here, while these examples are compelling, and
wait, whoa.
They're not.
What examples are compelling? I didn't read any examples in this whole damn paper that were compelling.
No compelling examples.
Okay.
All contemporary documents it could have been gotten from, or the strength of evidence is overestimated by the church and its apologists.
Look closely, Bill. These examples are compelling.
Yeah.
The power of Christ compels you.
And in this instance, that's true. It's the power of Christ that compels one to think those things are strong when they're not. While these examples,
with us. I mean, we're saying they're compelling. All you have to do is go along with this.
Yeah, you can't argue it because we're telling you they're compelling.
We're doing the heavy lifting. All you have to do is bow your head and say yes.
So while there's tons of evidence that's deeply compelling, there are also many examples of Joseph Smith's interpretations of the facsimiles that are not consistent.
No.
We currently know about the ancient world, pretty much all of it.
They're not consistent with what we currently know about the ancient world. How do you account for that, guys?
Yeah. While acknowledging there is much we do not understand about the translation process, it's important to remember that the truth and value of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate.
Okay, wait. This is the end of the chiasmus, where they come back to where they started, right?
Yep.
Which is, evidence isn't important. Just pray about it. If you feel good, then it's true.
This can't be settled by scholarly debate on the front end, and on the back end, it's important to remember that the truth and value of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate concerning the book's translation. It really is the same sentence, sort of changed the order of the words, but it's the same sentence from the beginning.
I think that's the main theme. That's kind of how you set forth your theme, right? You're in your essay. You've got your what do you call it? Your thesis statement. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and then the meat of it, and then your conclusion where you reiterate what you set out to do.
Yeah, your thesis statement comes back.
Reading the Book of Abraham, pondering its content, and praying about its teachings can help you gain a spiritual witness of its eternal value. So the old trick is, these are not the droids you're looking for, but if you pray about it, you'll get the answer we want you to have.
Which once again underscores what I said at the beginning, which is, why did you spend all that time in the middle, even talking about the evidence, if
Yeah.
it doesn't make any difference?
Well, I mean, it is compelling.
These guys are not being straight with the reader.
No. It is all designed to create elevation, emotion, make you feel good about the beliefs that you wish you could hold forever and not give up, only to find out that if you just sit still, not need your beliefs to be your beliefs, and you're willing to think about them, every piece of evidence, every argument being made, all the stuff from both sides points to the Book of Abraham is not at all what Joseph Smith claimed. That's for sure. The church acknowledges that. And it's not what they claim either, which is where we've arrived at now in the modern day. All right.
And here we've got the last question, which is horribly loaded and assumes this is begging the question 101. Okay. The question is, can you get a testimony of the Book of Abraham? Okay. That's the question. It is begged by framing the question, assuming that as a fact, and instead asking, how can I gain a testimony of the Book of Abraham?
And the way you do that, there is much we don't know about the way the Book of Abraham was revealed to Joseph Smith.
They just said that.
But in many ways, our questions about the process are less important than the question of whether God revealed new scripture to Joseph Smith. This is a matter of faith.
So if I think the process is important, then I'm the one who's wrong. Is that right?
Yes. And when they say that what is important is the question of whether God revealed new scripture to Joseph Smith, and this is a matter of faith, that's right. And you should notice how many religions are able to manipulate you into feeling elevated feelings so that you arrive at a conclusion that that religion is true. And if other religions are able to do that, then you should be able to acknowledge that your religion could do that too.
Mm.
And then you're back to what is the real way to decide which religions are true. And I think at that point, it is a question about the process. It is questions that are in the realm of scholarly debate. It really is science and studies in these fields that gives you any fighting chance of figuring out any religion's false claims about history, about what the Bible means, about what is truly from God and what isn't in terms of any ancient text or modern text being delivered as scripture. And I don't think feelings is the way to know, because lots of religions rely on feelings and many people feel them.
You know where I get especially those elevated feelings when I'm reading the Book of Abraham? It's that part where I read about how Pharaoh was cursed as pertaining to the priesthood because he was descended from Ham.
Yeah, that one's not emphasized anymore, is it? I don't know that we emphasize it. I don't know that we teach it. All right, that's the end here. That's the conclusion. I'll take that off the screen. Let me change this up. And we'll go to the phone lines. Let me see if I can make sure this is working. All right, I think this is maybe Zach. Zach, is that the name?
It is, yep.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
How are you guys?
Really good. Welcome
Great.
to Mormonism Live.
We're having a Zach attack.
Thank you. I gotta say, first of all, that I've been with you guys from the beginning, and you have helped through the faith crisis so much. So thank you for your show.
You're very welcome.
So I grew up super obsessed with Egypt and Mormonism, and I loved looking at the facsimiles in church. And then when my faith crisis happened, I said, well, they have to have these translations by now. And so then I hopped on Wikipedia and saw how different it was. And that was it. That was enough for me.
Whoa. Hold on a minute. Hold on. The church said it was transparent. as transparent as it knows how to be. Are you suggesting that nowhere along the way, up until that moment, again, up until the gospel topic essay, yes, there is a brief moment in like the New York Times in 1917 or something.
12.
There's a brief moment where if you read outside the correlated curriculum, you might hear Hugh Nibley or some other scholar reference that the translations don't match. But anywhere in the correlated curriculum, year after year, especially every fourth year, learning in gospel doctrine about the Pearl of Great Price and the Book of Abraham, did no one tell you that Egyptologists now can translate this and it doesn't match?
No, and it was this weird thing where it's this mysterious thing. They're almost pieces of art. They're not meant to be translated. And so looking at the translations, then, you see how different it is. But there was one line that stood out to me, and it was Facsimile 2, figure 11. And Joseph said, he said, also, if the world can find out these numbers, so let it be. Amen. And so that just stuck with me because, it kind of implies that Joseph thought somebody could maybe figure out Egyptian someday. And that makes me think that he might have thought he was doing real translation the whole time. But I haven't heard anybody talk about that before. So I just wanted to bring that up.
My take on that, now you may be right, Zach. My take on that, reading it in context, which I'm doing from memory now, I don't have it in front of me, but was that Joseph Smith was interpreting some of the things of the numbers. They have little numbers next to the figures in the hypocephalus of Facsimile 2. And I think that's what he meant by the numbers. He would translate some, but others he would say, I'm not going to translate this, but the translation of this one is to be had in the temple.
Right.
And my impression is when he said, if others can translate, I'm not going to give these to you because they're too sacred. And that was a continuation of his thinking about you'll get them in the temple. If anybody else can interpret it, then good, but I'm not going to interpret it. It was like said with the assurance that nobody else can. That was how I read it anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
How long have you been on this side of things, Zach?
About 4 years.
So it sounds like if you've been with us since the beginning, that this has been a really slow burn, that it took a lot of different issues. I'm imagining, you can please correct me, but it sounds like it was a lot of issues and a sort of a slow burn of evaluating a ton of things, trying to make it work. And eventually 4 years ago, it just finally came apart.
Yeah, well, it's a lifetime of internal pressure that you can't, put words to, and then you don't realize that pressure doesn't need to exist in you, and so finding this was like finding a back door out of the prison, So
Finding it is like you feel like what is this diagram? It's like a cartoon where some guy is standing in this. It's like a well. There's a circle around him or something like that. For whatever reason, he doesn't think he can get out, and it has to do with how the cartoon's drawn. Hopefully somebody out there knows what I'm talking about. And then he realizes it's just a drawing on the ground and he can step out of it anytime he wants. He's not trapped in a well. It just is drawn to look like he's in a well. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anyway, the idea of it's being a trap is simply an illusion. And I'm glad you found the back way out of the prison.
yeah. Well, you guys are amazing. I love the intelligent articulation of the details and just, the passion that you have for just helping people get to a different, better place. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate it because that is the reason that I decided I was going to retire from the practice of law and devote myself to this full time.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it very much. Thank you for the call.
All right. Yep.
Take
Bye.
it easy. All right. There are no other calls there. I am just going to put up one more time here. I just put the Mormon newscast event August 4th, and the and you and I up in Salt Lake City on August 2nd. Both of those links are right there in the live chat. They're up on the screen as well. I'll put them in the show notes also as soon as the show ends, and so folks can sign up and register for those. We spend a lot of time when you look at all the stuff we've done in the Book of Abraham. We did those 3 episodes early on. There's been several that you've done that were tangential issues to the Book of Abraham. We've talked about the catalyst theory. We've talked about the missing scroll theory, and we'll do it again and again because this is one of those issues that you have to, again, someone's always waking up to the messiness of Mormonism every single day. And it's interesting. I'll go on Reddit. I'll go on Ex-Mormon Reddit, and I'll see something posted there today that's been hashed out 100 times before, but that person is coming to this moment innocently, and they'll think, it's almost like they think they're the first one to have found it. They show up and say, hey, whoa, wait up, what about this? And we've hashed it out so many times. Ex-Mormon Reddit's hashed it out. Other places have. But when that person shows up having just today discovered that things don't add up, they need someone in the here and now to slow down and to walk them through these issues and help them understand them. No apologist, mark my words, no apologist is going to take you through all these issues and explain the facts to you clearly. They're going to hit on an evidence. They're going to move along. They do not want to address all these issues this way. And so I just want to note, for those of you who are like, Book of Abraham, I've heard this before, just recognize that there are 50 people, 100 people, whatever it is, who just this morning woke up and for the first time ever asked the question, what if this isn't true? And so we will constantly have to hit on these issues. You'll see these things happen from time to time. Any closing words from you, RFM? Otherwise, we'll end the night. I'll check the phone lines one more time, and there isn't anything there. So any last words from you, and we'll close out the show.
I found it entertaining reading this, and actually the funniest word in all of the essays is contained in this essay, and that word is yes.
Yes.
I know a good joke when I hear one.
Okay, I don't get it. Please help me out.
Has the church been transparent about the Book of Abraham? And their answer is yes.
Yeah, at least
you're laughing. I told you.
At least
you can't
20,
not laugh.
Yeah, no, at least 20 times tonight. We've shown that just this article alone is lying to you and deceiving you and obfuscating the truth over and over and over again. And I dare, by the way, this is a safe space for Kerry Molstein, John Gee, Stephen Smoot. If you want to come on and we'll talk about these issues, now we won't let you say ridiculous stuff. We're going to ask you questions. We're going to push back. But
what are they going to say?
They're not going to want to come on and do that.
I mean, if you don't let them say ridiculous stuff, what are they going to talk about?
What are they going to say?
Yeah. So we can't put that condition on them.
I'll come on your program. I'll be happy to. RFM, you'll go on their program, right?
Well, do they have a program?
Well, I'm just saying, if they want to have a conversation,
sure, I'd be happy to.
Arena.
I could find a space in my dance card for Carrie Shirts. I keep thinking it's Carrie Mulestein. Well, for either of them, for both of them.
Yeah.
We'll have a threesome.
I think I can handle the hand grenades and landmines, John, if you want to have that conversation. But I don't think these guys want to do that, and they've never really been much interested in telling the truth. And they in the church show that over and over again. Folks, thank you so much for being a part of our show, Mormonism Live, every Wednesday, now at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Check out those events. Please like and subscribe, hit that bell so that you see the notifications of the next shows that are upcoming. And we really appreciate everybody who supports the program. If you want to be a donor and help this show stay alive, please go to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button. $5 or $10 a month would help such a great deal. And for folks who are more financially able, please consider donating more. We deeply appreciate that. And for all of you out there who watch the show, who follow our content, we're grateful for the chance to share these things with you, and appreciate very much that you get benefit from them. And we see your messages. We try to respond to a lot of those. Thank you so much for watching the show, supporting the program. And RFM and I are just grateful to be a part of your world and to share with you the things that we find interesting in Mormonism. See you guys next week, and we'll see you Friday, Mormonism After Dark, 8 p.m. There will not be a Mormonism After Dark the weekend of Sunstone, but we do have a few more weeks before then. 8 p.m. on Friday, Mormonism After Dark. Otherwise, the Mormon Newscast, 6 p.m. on Mondays. And if not, we'll see you on the flip side of Mormonism Live next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Have a great day, everybody.
Good night.